Good afternoon, everyone. Pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, pre-budget consultations begin today for 2012, and I'll introduce our first panel of witnesses for this afternoon. We have Martin Unruh, President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Kim McCaig, Vice President and COO from the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association. Corrine Pohlman, Vice President, National Affairs of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And Denis St-Pierre, Chair of the Tax and Fiscal Policy Advisory Group for the Certified General Accountants Association of Canada. And Bonnie Daw, Chair of the Canadian Income Tax Committee for the Tax Executives Institute. Welcome to all the witnesses. So each of you has a 5-minute presentation, and then we'll do our questions and answers. So Mr. Unruh, will begin with you for your 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Martin Unruh, and I am the President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, which represents over 80,000 beef producers in Canada. I also have Andrea Brocklebank in behind us here today, who is the Research Manager for the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and I've asked her also to come in if there are some questions that we will need to address. Canada's beef cattle industry has been through several years of financial turmoil, but until recently was in a strong recovery with tremendous opportunity due to strong global demand for beef and positive prices. In 2012, farm cash receipts from cattle and calves combined with a multiplier effect from downstream economic activity contributed $26 billion to Canada's GDP. However, global food demand is expected to double by 2050, which would require a 1.75% increase in productivity per year. Currently, productivity is only increasing by about 1.4% per year. This, in combination with increased competition for land and water resources, has resulted in rising and volatile commodity prices. This challenges our industry's ability to maintain positive margins and, more importantly, fulfill increased demand for food in a sustainable manner. Increased investments in research and innovation are critical for our industry, and this will ensure the long-term sustainability and growth of the Canadian beef industry and allow us to use limited resources more efficiently. Research investments made over the past 30 years have transformed North American beef production. The beef industry has seen a 14% reduction in water use, 34% reduction in land use, 20% reduction in manure production, and an 18% reduction in our carbon footprint per pound of beef produced in the last 30 years. In tandem, research has assisted in providing consumers with a high-quality, nutritious, and safe beef product. Research also provides the science necessary to demonstrate the integrity of animal health and food safety systems, which are increasingly important in trade negotiations and integral to reducing food safety incidents and growing consumer demand. Continued improvements in production efficiencies through research are also required to ensure industry can compete with other protein sources globally. Although the need for continued advances in research is clear, we are very concerned that a considerable loss of Canadian research infrastructure, project funding, and scientific expertise may hamper further progress. Despite an increased focus on innovation over the last several years, due to budget cuts, federal beef research funding over the past 2 decades has seen a net decline on an inflation-adjusted basis of 35% to 40% by our estimates. Ongoing cuts have seriously and negatively impacted research programs and scientific expertise. The viability of some critical research programs in areas such as animal health, food safety, and plant breeding are currently in question. Not only does this place future progress at risk, but it is a significant deterrent in attracting new expertise. One of the most significant recent industry/government investments is the development of a beef cattle industry science cluster. This initiative brings together Canada's largest industry and public beef research funders, which are the Beef Cattle Research Council and Ag Canada, respectively, to deliver priority research. I'm convinced that the beef science cluster approach will result in a very coordinated, efficient research model. However, cluster funding needs to be increased to ensure meaningful results. This should not come at a cost to the maintenance of basic long-term federal research programs outside of the clusters and core areas. To summarize, we have 3 recommendations relating to research. Investments in beef research need to be increased to more appropriately reflect its important contribution to the industry and broader public good. The second one is federal research funding must be delivered on a minimum 5-year basis. Program delivery has typically resulted in a 3-year funding cycle with gaps in funding. Longer-term, more predictable funding commitments are necessary to maintain strong research programs, attract new scientific expertise, and deliver meaningful research results. The third one is federal government research programs outside of the science clusters must be maintained in core areas including animal health and welfare, environment, plant breeding, and food safety. This is critical not only for our industry's competitiveness, but also to ensure scientific expertise is available to respond promptly and effectively to issues and opportunities that arise. I would also like to briefly mention increasing investments in market development. This is a critical competitive piece for Canada, which exports 45% of its beef production.
Unrau, could you wrap up your 5
Growth in
minutes,
exports of U.S. beef to Canada and the rest of the world over the past 2 years have been phenomenal. And some of this is due to currency exchange levels, but some is also due to the USDA's investment in export promotion. A report from the Office of Management and Budget puts returns to market promotion spending at $35 per dollar.
Excuse me, Mr. Unrau, sorry, your 5 minutes is up. I couldn't catch your eye earlier. The rest of your presentation can come out in the questions and answers. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Kim McCaig from the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association. Mr. McCaig, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here before you to share some of the views of the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, and I look forward to hopefully answering any questions you might have. CEPA represents companies that transport 97% of the oil and natural gas produced and used in Canada. Our membership currently operates more than 110,000 kilometers of pipelines in Canada, transporting over 3.2 million barrels of oil and 14.6 billion cubic feet of gas every day, while employing over 8,000 full-time employees. Pipelines are the only feasible and safest means of transporting large volumes of crude oil and natural gas over land. In delivering Budget 2012, Minister Flaherty acknowledged that the natural resource and energy sector are driving the economic growth across the country. They are creating good jobs not only directly, but also indirectly in manufacturing, clerical work, skilled trades, and financial services. Canada's resource industries offer huge potential to create even more jobs and growth now and over the next generation. The responsible resource development provisions of Budget 2012 put in place the enabling conditions to realize these opportunities. CEPA has been a strong supporter of the objective behind regulatory reform, namely improving the efficiency of and the environmental outcomes from environmental assessment. The proposed process reduces duplication, ensures timelines, and maintains or improves environmental standards by focusing assessments on major environmental concerns and avoiding significant adverse effects. Our recommendations for the 2013 budget speak to the next steps in this process, and they fall into 2 intrinsically related categories: ensuring regulatory effectiveness and pipeline safety performance. CEPA's recommendation with respect to regulatory effectiveness is that the federal government commit sufficient resources to implement the changes set in motion, as well as monitor their success. Bill C-38 changed the legislative framework for the review of major projects in Canada, but the policy and regulatory work still needs to be completed to support those changes. Continuing regulatory reform process will ensure through timely, efficient, and predictable processes, investment can be made with confidence, and that the strategic scrutiny and clear outcomes will ensure environmental protection. Pipelines currently transport approximately $125 billion in oil and gas at a cost of $5 billion a year. Pipeline transportation provides a value add of approximately $120 billion to the Canadian economy. Given current plans for expansion, the industry is in a position to add even more value, provided it can get a plan for infrastructure built. Integrity-related regulatory efficiency is pipeline safety, as it is the safety performance of our industry that is a key component in maintaining our social license to operate. Safety is the top priority for pipeline companies in all aspects of pipeline development and operation, and the industry has taken a leadership role in these efforts. In 2011, CEPA members spent more than $600 million in monitoring and maintenance activities to ensure the safety of pipelines. Extensive regulatory tools exist to support and address pipeline integrity, including construction standards, maintenance, audits, and regulatory powers to shut down and investigate. However, Canada does not currently have the means to require and enforce the physical protection of pipelines from activities of others. Damage to pipelines from third parties is where we face the biggest risk. Experience in other countries show that lives are saved where laws and enforcement are in place, including requirements for mandatory one-call in all jurisdictions and administrative penalties for enforcement of those rules. CEPA appreciates the efforts to date to both introduce administrative monetary penalties and increase pipeline inspections, which we believe, along with transparent enforcement tools, including escalating fines and mandatory one-call, is a key part of the solution. Canada has been fortunate in weathering the economic troubles that have challenged the rest of the world. This is due in large part to the role that resource and the energy industry has played. The process set in motion by the government to reform the regulatory system is important to ensure Canada can retain and attract investment necessary to develop pipeline infrastructure. This infrastructure will support growth in the natural resource sector and the diversification of Canada's markets. Commitments made by the federal government to ensure the regulatory reform process is effective and fully implemented to deliver better environmental outcomes, and that regulators have the necessary tools to keep pipelines safe are important steps to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next from the CFIB, Ms. Pullman, you have the floor.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. CFIB is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization representing more than 109,000 small and medium-sized businesses across Canada who collectively employ more than 1.25 million Canadians and account for $75 billion in GDP. Our members represent all sectors of the economy and are found in every region of the country. Now, you should have a slide deck in front of you that I'd like to walk you through as we go through this presentation over the next few minutes. CFIB's most recent business barometer, which is on slide 2 of the presentation, shows that small business owners were a little more upbeat in September as the index rose for the first time since March, stopping a 5 consecutive month slide through the spring and summer months. Despite the increase, the index still suggests Canada's economy is growing at below average rates. To help get us through this sluggish economy, governments need to address the issues of greatest concern to small businesses. As you can see on slide 3, the top issue is total tax burden, which I'll get to in a moment. Second, though, is government regulation and paper burden. We were pleased to see the government's recent red tape announcement, and in particular the plans to measure the overall burden, set service standards, and implement a system of ongoing oversight and accountability, as these are key factors that can make a difference to small business owners. Now the hard work begins, though, in implementing those changes, so we plan to closely monitor how those are done. The third high priority issue is government debt and deficit. Small business owners understand the importance of paying down debt, and so we've seen this issue grow in importance as the debt grew over the last few years. We recently asked small business owners about the current time frame to eliminate the federal deficit within the next 3 years. As you can see on slide 4, almost half believe it is an appropriate time frame, while just over 1/3 would like it to see it eliminated sooner. So we recommend that the government stay focused on eliminating the deficit by 2015 or earlier. One way to do that is to bring federal public sector wages and benefits more in line with the private sector. Last year, CFIB launched a pension campaign calling for greater transparency of public sector pension liabilities and fairness for taxpayers. Over the last year, CFIB has collected over 55,000 alerts from those concerned about the state of Canada's public sector pension system, and many of you have likely received them in your office. To be clear, we're not asking for changes to public sector pension benefits that have already been accumulated. We were pleased to see the government move to address some of these issues in Budget 2012, and we urge all the MPs to quickly implement those changes. We would also like you to consider a few additional measures. For example, they're listed on slide 5. Increase the normal retirement age to 65 for all in the federal civil service in a similar way as the OAS changes were done. Convert all MP pensions and all new hires in the public sector to defined contribution plans, which is something the EDC has recently done. And eliminate the bridge benefit, which provides retiring public servants with top-ups equivalent to full CPP benefits until age 65, and this is something that the Bank of Canada has eliminated already. Not only is there concern with public sector pensions, but saving for their own retirement is a very real concern for entrepreneurs. Slide 6 is from an upcoming report on succession that shows that almost half plan to exit their business in the next 5 years, and more than 3/4 want to exit their business in the next 10 years. One of the most important measures to assist in this transition is the $750,000 lifetime capital gains exemption. Not only is this a key component of a business owner's retirement planning, but it has also been effectively used as a source of financing for the next generation of entrepreneurs. In 2007, the government increased the exemption from $500,000 to $750,000, the first and only increase in more than 20 years. To avoid waiting another 20 years for an increase, CFIB called on the government to index the exemption to inflation, and this was promised by the Conservatives in the run-up to the 2008 election. However, it has never been implemented. We believe the time has come not only to index the lifetime capital gains exemption to inflation, but to find ways to simplify it and perhaps even expand it to include some assets. Now, you may recall that the top issue of concern to small business owners was total tax burden. With so many taxes, it was important to understand which ones have the biggest impact on the growth of their business. As you can see on slide 7, payroll taxes have by far the greatest impact on growth. Why? Because it's a tax on jobs. It must be paid regardless of any profit. This is why EI remains a key issue for us, and is why we continue to push for the extension and expansion of the EI hiring credit for as long as EI rates continue to go up, as they will again in 2013. It's also why we continue to advocate strongly against any increase in CPP premiums. When asked directly about specific measures that would help maintain or strengthen business performance, it should be no surprise that measures related to payroll taxes are the most important, ranking first, third, and fourth in the chart on slide 8 for the reasons just discussed. But also important is reducing the small business corporate tax rate. This is not surprising, as there's been a gradual erosion of the value of the small business rate as the general corporate rate isn't coming down. While CFIB supports at reducing all corporate taxes in order to stimulate investment and growth, there are good reasons why the small business rate was significantly lower than the general rate. For example, small businesses tend to have a higher tax and regulatory burden per capita. Therefore, we would suggest the government commit to some form of targeted federal-provincial combined tax rate for small business, such as 12%, or alternatively commit to a tax plan to ensure that the small business rate does not exceed half or some percentage of the general rate. So it is no more clear than during Small Business Week that small businesses truly are the backbone of Canada's economy and the heartbeat of our communities. The recommendations presented here are summarized on the last 3 slides, are just some of the ways that we can get small businesses growing in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Monsieur Saint-Denis from the Certified General Accountants Association of Canada.
Madame la Présidente, merci. Mesdames et Messieurs.
Madam Chair, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you for giving us the opportunity to take part in the pre-budget consultations. My name is Denis Saint-Pierre. I'm a Chartered General Accountant, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the General Certified Accountants Association of Canada. I practice in New Brunswick. I'm an expert in fiscal strategy for SMEs.
For the 2013 federal budget, you posed 5 questions. And we can summarize all of these questions with one answer, again this year, which is tax simplification. And we submit that many of Canada's challenges can be addressed through tax reform. Now that the tax rates have come down, we must ask ourselves, what kind of system do we want, or better yet, what kind of system does Canada need for the future? Canada's tax system is unduly complex. Entrepreneurs will tell you that. My clients tell me that. There is a growing consensus that the complexity of Canada's tax system must be addressed if Canada is to remain competitive, able to attract business and investments, create jobs and economic growth. For example, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce identifies Canada's complex tax system as one of the top 10 barriers to competitiveness. Tax simplification is the #1 policy priority for CGA Canada. The federal government must take action to modernize Canada's tax regime. Canada needs a simple, fair, and efficient tax system to help build a strong, competitive 21st century economy. Done properly, as a revenue-neutral initiative, coordinated by all levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, tax simplification could yield substantial benefits, and a few of them. Increased compliance rate. When it is simple, it's easy to comply. Lower costs for taxpayers, less paperwork for business, lower administrative costs for the government, and a more secure tax base with predictable revenue. How? Well, in last year's pre-budget report, this committee endorsed CGA Canada's recommendation to establish an expert panel to review, modernize, and simplify the tax system, as was done in other countries. We thank committee members for their support, and we also want to reiterate that the creation of an expert panel still remains CGA Canada's first recommendation. There's an important place for an expert panel to chart the course towards improving Canada's tax system, and there is an important role for the Finance Committee in framing the issues and defining the scope of study for the expert panel. But let's not wait for the expert panel to be appointed. There are still concrete measures that could be taken by this committee to simplify the tax system. Two things of attention. First, the government must introduce a technical tax amendment bill. The last time a technical tax bill was passed by Parliament was over 11 years ago. There are literally hundreds of unlegislated tax amendments to the Income Tax Act, which I showed this committee last year by bringing the Income Tax Act, if you recall, that have been proposed but not yet enacted, which brings uncertainty and unpredictability to the process. Second, we strongly feel that implementing a sunset provision would ensure that tax amendments are legislated, and ultimately it will eliminate the ever-growing backlog of unlegislated tax measures once and for all. With this provision, if a tax policy change is announced and not incorporated into legislation within a reasonable amount of time, the measure would lapse. This would bring greater certainty to tax legislation, reduce compliance and paperwork burden, and perhaps more importantly, prevent any future legislative backlogs. Those are a few simple but important steps which would go some distance in improving and strengthening Canada's tax system. Canada needs a 21st century tax system which is simple, fair, efficient, and transparent, with low, internationally competitive tax rates. Enfin, nous nous devons de mentionner que CGA Canada tiendra.
Lastly, we must say that we are going to have a one-day national summit on simplifying the tax system on Tuesday, December 4th in Ottawa. At this summit, many of the participating parties, including opinion leaders and public officials, will consider strategic approaches to take to simplify the federal tax system. We hope that MPs will be present, and in fact, we will present them with the conclusions of this summit. Madam Chair, thank you for your attention, and I will be pleased to answer any questions you may have with regard to the recommendations we have made to simplify our tax system. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Pierre.
From the Tax Executives Institute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am the Tax Director for FINA, and I'm here today as Chair of the Canadian Income Tax Committee for Tax Executives Institute. TEI is the preeminent association of business tax professionals worldwide. Our 7,000 members work for 3,000 of the largest companies in Canada, U.S., Europe, and Asia. My comments are endorsed by both TEI's Canadian members and others who have significant operations and investments in Canada. Excuse me. During the past decade, the government has focused on making Canada's business tax structure more competitive. By reducing the federal corporate income tax rate, the government has confirmed its commitment, enhanced the prospects for sustainable economic growth, and increased the attractiveness of investments in Canada. But Canada must remain vigilant, especially as other countries restructure their tax systems and lower marginal effective tax rates. Thus, TEI welcomed the opportunity to participate in the government's consultation on the taxation of corporate groups and subsequently submitted comments explaining that implementing such a system will improve competitiveness and better align Canada with the rest of the world. More than two-thirds of OECD countries provide explicit legislative or regulatory regimes for loss transfers, with Canada being the only G7 country that lacks such a feature. History shows that following a financial crisis, economic stagnation may occur as credit markets tighten. Permitting corporate groups to offset profits and losses and share other tax attributes in an efficient, straightforward fashion will temper these effects by improving corporate liquidity, reducing borrowing costs, and eliminating transaction costs. As important, CRA will no longer have to devote resources to issuing advance income tax rulings. TEI provided detailed recommendations for a group loss transfer system to the Department of Finance. An annually elective tax loss or attribute transfer system similar to that in the UK will be the simplest and most flexible to adopt, requiring the fewest modifications to the Income Tax Act. Attributes that should be part of the system include non-capital losses, capital losses, carryovers of such amounts, and investment and other tax credits. Next, in December 2008, the Advisory Panel on Canada's System of International Taxation issued a report with recommendations for enhancing Canada's tax system. Some recommendations have been implemented, but one significant area has not yet been addressed. Specifically, the current process for obtaining waivers of withholding taxes imposed under Regulations 105 and 102 should be repealed and replaced with a self-certification system. In respect of Reg 105, the advisory panel found that service providers commonly gross up their fees to offset the withholding tax, which raises costs for Canadian businesses. Compliance costs are significant, and the waiver process is cumbersome and is not used as often as it should be. The advisory panel also determined that Reg 102 places significant administrative burdens on non-residents and Canadian corporations. The advisory panel recommended replacing the current advance waiver requirement with a system for non-residents to self-certify eligibility for reduced withholding taxes, especially where the non-resident is exempt under a treaty such as the Canada-US Treaty. A certification system based on current information reporting requirements will maintain CRA's enforcement capability, but shift compliance costs to the certifying party, minimize tax withholding refunded to exempt parties, reduce tax gross-up costs, and minimize administrative burdens for CRA and taxpayers. TEI urges the adoption of the panel's recommendations. The 2012 budget included a proposal to curtail foreign affiliate dumping transactions, and draft legislation to implement the proposal was released in August. TEI fully supports the government's targeting of abusive tax-motivated foreign affiliate dumping transactions, but regrets that the proposed legislation will diminish Canada's attractiveness in the competition for global capital and investors. Fundamentally, there is no abuse of the Canadian tax system where cash generated by a Canadian resident business is invested downstream in the common shares of a controlled foreign affiliate, and Canada is entitled to both the growth potential of the downstream investment and future cash repatriations. Ultimately, the economic return from a downstream common share investment will flow back to Canada. TEI's June and September 2012 submissions provide many recommendations for technical changes, expanded grandfathering relief, and additional relieving measures. We would be pleased to work with the Department of Finance and the committee to narrow the legislation. In conclusion, TEI thanks the committee for the opportunity to participate in the pre-budget consultations, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Daw.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the witnesses, and now we'll turn to the committee for questions and answers. You each have 5 minutes, beginning with you, Mr. Mai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you there. Thank you very much, all witnesses, for coming. As you know, we used to be able to travel and to see different organizations and their writing in their cities, but this time we decided to have people come to Ottawa, and we thank you very much for taking the time to come here and for your presentations. And unfortunately, we don't have time to ask questions to everyone, but we'll try to do as best as we can. First question to CGA. In your recommendation, you talk about modernizing Canada's tax system to protect government revenues. As you probably know, here the Finance Committee will be looking at tax evasion and tax haven. Is that something that is related to protecting the government's revenue in terms of tax system and looking at those loopholes?
Well, of course, no one in the tax community likes to hear the word tax loophole, and no one likes to hear about big cases that money flew outside of Canada and were not repatriated on a taxable basis. And I believe that that's what the review and TEI presentation, sometimes the government introduces legislation to try to curtail those types of plans, maybe goes too far. And when they do that, it brings complexity to the entire system. So it is important to differentiate from legitimate good tax planning, which should be simple, efficient, and easy to understand, and loopholes and tax evasion, which no accounting body does endorse. So we do encourage the government to look into that as a source of revenue. It's easy. The legislation is already passed. Why not go after that in those tax havens where it's not permitted, and allow the normal Canadian to benefit from an easy-to-understand tax system?
Have you seen a lot of changes lately on the tax system that would actually target or tackle that problem?
Not particularly, no. No, we have heard that there are efforts from the government on disclosure, and there are some arrangements between countries. When you have tax arrangements with countries, then you can share information, and we understand that the government is working on that, which is good. And when you share information between countries, then maybe you can go and get that type of revenue. But I have not heard anything specifically from the government to attack that type of planning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peut-être qu'on va devoir vous réinviter pour lorsqu'on va faire l'étude.
I'd have to invite you again when we study tax evasion.
I mean, lately our leader has come out and said that he would support a east-west pipeline so that we can actually have, I mean, if you look at what's happening in Quebec, we have our refineries shutting down, whereas we have the infrastructure to be there. Would it be something that you would support in terms of having an east-west pipeline?
I'll leave the policy discussion up to you people around government. From a pipeline perspective, I would say pipelines will be built whenever the market requires it and demands it. The idea that what pipelines can do and how it supports the infrastructure in Canada, I think, is well known. The key thing I would say from a government perspective that I would ask is that continue the current process of one project, one review, and those types of things around regulatory reform, which really then helps making timely decisions around this pipeline infrastructure. And I'm pretty confident that if those reforms are carried through, that type of debate around that type of proposal would be carried out very efficiently, and we'd make the right decision for Canadians.
Much. Quick questions, because I don't have a lot of time. For the Canadian Federal CFIB, as you probably know, at the NDP, we've been asking to have a reduction of the small business tax. We feel that the fact that, if we just reduce the corporate tax cut for big businesses, it doesn't necessarily help the small businesses. Knowing that the small businesses are creating most of the jobs, what is your view on because I think it's one of your recommendation. Would you really push for that, the fact that reducing the small business tax would help the economy?
Ms. Pullman, you have 30 seconds.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, and in fact, in our survey that we just shared with you, there was one of the issues that our members are telling us would help them grow and maintain and grow their businesses. So we are certainly asking the government to consider that the erosion of the small business rate as the general corporate rate came down, and we'd like to see some consideration now given for a plan for the small business rate to start coming down as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mai. And Ms. McLeod, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd also like to thank the witnesses, and of course, again, the time is so short when there's so many fascinating presentations and very diverse. I just have to make a quick comment. I was very surprised to hear Mr. St. Pierre say he was unaware of work done on tax loopholes, and I have watched the legislation go through, and I've noticed, I think it's over 50 since 2006, including things like mortgage insurance investment corporations. So I was just a little surprised that that was $2.4 billion that you indicated that you were unaware of work done by the government in terms of that area.
It may be that the term loophole is what threw me offside here. The loophole is something that relates to tax evasion, which is not legal to begin with. It is not something that you make people comply to. It's something that you enforce and stop. So that's what I was referring to enforcing illegal activities such as opening accounts in foreign countries, not reporting the income. So this is something that I had not heard about, enforcing those types of planning. I am not talking about specific measures to curtail tax minimization strategies which may appear unfair, which I must admit, yes, the government has done some work upon in the last few years, yes.
Okay, and then also in terms of the work overseas with TIAs and a number of initiatives.
Yes, that was not what I was referring to. I was talking about tax evasion and not reporting income, which should be reported. Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like to go to Mr. Unruh, and certainly I represent cattle country. Kamloops, Thompson Caribou is the riding that I represent, and certainly I acknowledge, we had very difficult times and we had smiles on the faces for too short a period, and I guess hopefully the challenges will be overcome again very shortly. Now, in terms of increasing, you talked about marketing, and I know locally we've done some significant marketing, but could you talk a little bit, the work in terms of the free trade agreements, is that making a big difference in terms of your industry, and is it a good focus to continue with?
Yes, it is, and the focus has to be on working with domestic products, domestic marketing, also with working with products globally and international trade. I think it's important to note that of course, an animal is, when it is processed, it is pieced out and you sell the pieces. You don't sell the whole animal. And so what happens is, for example, you may be able to sell a tongue into Japan that's worth about $2 in Canada. It may be worth, $26 in Japan. So those are the reasons why international trade is so important to us as a beef industry in Canada. And as the cattle industry, every cattle producer benefits from these type of trade deals or trade negotiations, and finally deals that we make with countries around the globe. And so the more trade we can get for our beef, the better off the producers, the grassroots producers in Canada will be. Just going back to as we piece these animals out, we benefit from the global trade.
Thank you. And I appreciate your comments about research, and I also, again, know that there is, some dollars that perhaps is, I think many people would like to see more invested in research in their particular areas, but one thing I've wondered about is, do we manage to work together with our partners perhaps as well as we should, whether the universities, or do you see any opportunities that we're missing in terms of leveraging and working together with the research dollars? So if you've got this pot and do we need to do anything that will make that easier for you to create those partnerships? Is there any gaps?
Well, I think we're on the road to creating some benefits around that. 5 or 6, before the clusters came into being, universities would build small silos and work within those, and so at times there would be research done on a certain issue, and it would be repeated without anybody knowing about it. And of course, one of the other issues we had was the tech transfer of the research. And so what happened was some of this research was repeated. In the last few years, of course, with the cluster, the science cluster coming into play, it's been more transparent and more open, or research between universities and research centers has been more transparent and more open for others to see. And so therefore, we're improving that and working on that. And so it definitely is a positive, yes. The only difficulty we have is it seems to be that we don't get the full 5-year funding. So we end up with 3 years of funding, so there's always a bit of a gap before the next program begins. And so when you're doing long-term research, it's very difficult to continue with research if you have a gap in between the programs.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Thank you, Ms. John Grow. And Ms. Grow, welcome to the Finance Committee. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back. Mr. Enrad, the current issues that we're dealing with the outbreak in the E. coli and some of your comments about cuts to the research and so on in and around the whole beef industry that raise concerns to you. I'm backing it up a bit. According to the report that you put out 6 months ago, it was a concern then. Given the current outbreak and what you're dealing with now, would you like to give some comments on just where you think the government needs to go as far as the research based on what has just happened?
Might I ask our General Manager of Research to join me, please, to answer some of these questions?
Research Manager join. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, please.
As I understand the question, it's with regards to, has our position changed with research? I think, actually, no, it hasn't. Research is only part of the equation when we have something like the current food safety incidents. What we ask for is long-term continued investments, and food safety is one of the areas, and not the only area, but food safety is one of the core areas, and our top priority as an industry. We need continuity investments, not only to continue to address these issues, because these things don't go away, they evolve, bacteria changes, those types of things. So there needs to be ongoing examination and investment. But also, we need to have what I called fire station capacity available when an issue arises. And in order to attract research capacity, it's a competitive world. There's lots of things researchers can do. In order to attract capacity into food safety and into agriculture per se, they need to see continuity of funding as well. If they have a good research program going and after 3 years there's uncertainty and a 2-year gap, they'll leave, they'll go somewhere else. And so that's why, I can't speak to if it would have helped this issue particularly, because research is the long-term frame. But it is very important, obviously, to address the issues, but also to have the people available to help us move forward as an industry long-term.
The issues in and around people's concerns about eating beef. I've had this on the weekend. Every time I've sat down at various events, my first thought was, where did the beef come from? And interestingly enough, around the table, a huge amount of people weren't eating the beef. Now, the beef may have come nothing to do with Alberta, but how are we, all of us, going to turn around and change that? After the BSE, it was a huge challenge to be able to get people's confidence back into the beef industry, which is, I agree, critical importance. It's an important industry for Canada. We want to see it continue. Has there been any additional funds put into the legacy fund that you were requesting, and what is the plan moving forward to get the confidence of consumers back?
I think it's very important to note that yes, we had asked for the legacy fund to be extended, and that hasn't happened up until this point, although we're still working on it and confident that it will be reinstated to some measure. The other issue, of course, is around the confidence of consumers, and that's something that will be a challenge for us, but we will approach that as such, and we will be able to move that forward, but it's not a short-term thing. And so when you talk about research into food safety, that also isn't a short-term issue, it's a long-term issue, and thus my comments about the 3 years and needing to go to the 5 years, and Andrea's also. I think it's very important to note that food safety is something that has to be addressed, that is being addressed, something that is of utmost importance to the cattle industry, or else our industry dies. We know that. And so it is a top priority for us to assure consumers in Canada and globally that we have a safe food system, that we have a safe way of ensuring that our food is safe, and that we can move forward as a leader in exporting food like beef and pork and other foods.
What is the plan now to deal with the current challenge? After the BSE, it was a long time getting turned around and moving forward. What's the plan now to try to move forward on the E. coli on a very quickly basis?
Mr. Enright, you have 10 seconds, I'm sorry.
I didn't.
Well, we are working on a strategy to move forward to ensure consumers that our food will be safe. The XL situation, of course, was a small situation from a plant that had good practices in the past. Something happened that it got caught, and we don't know exactly what those issues were, but they are being addressed as we speak and will be addressed as we move forward to ensure that our food is safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Groh. Mr. Van Kesteren, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for just a quick question. Just to Martin, you said you had 14% reduction in water use. How do you do that? When cattle drink a little bit less, or I don't understand that. Go ahead.
With improvements in animal health, feed efficiency, all of these things, basically what we've been able to do is produce what used to take 3 to 4 years to produce, we can produce in 2 years. So that means they're drinking less, that means they're producing less manure, and they're eating less. We have more efficient animals, and that's a mixture of everything from animal health and treatment to the feeds we provide them to management practices, all of those factors. But we've made substantial improvements in productivity, but what we know with limited resources, we need to continue moving down that road.
I was up in northern country in Alberta just before we rose back in September, and I was astounded by what's the construction that I've seen in the pipeline industry. You have a little bit of a labor, I think, problem with getting skilled workers. Is that true pretty much across your line of expertise?
In our industry sector, that's absolutely true. I think in the broader resource sector, it's even a greater concern. We have, as I said, over 8,000 employees today. That doesn't count all the contractors and those types of companies that work for us. And those companies are facing the issue even quicker than we are. But the issue comes down to the availability of skilled workers. We have a large workforce, or I should say a relatively small workforce, but who are in large numbers getting ever closer to the retirement age. And I could quote statistics, but the bottom line, I think the key thing for Canada when they look at the resource side of it and the issue, the skilled labor side, is that we do have to make significant long-term and short-term strategies around how we're going to replace those skilled workers, because it's evident in Canada today.
I was glad to see that you were pleased with the government's initiative of the one project, one review. And I agree with you. I think that's a step in the right direction. The only thing I was surprised not to see is a recommendation for getting skilled workers from one part of the country to the next. Have you thought about those things? Do you have a recommendation for the government in terms of tax deferrals or some type of project?
Again, there are some very specific issues associated around that, and I can get back to you with our exact asks around those. But what I would say from a implementation perspective right now, the key thing is whatever government can do to remove the barriers of people moving around this country in order to gain employment and incentivize it. So in other words, in areas where there are large unemployment, what can we do to help those people move to areas where there are employment? How do we do it? And not only look at it from a fixed perspective, so in other words, saying that we create programs that have people that we want to permanently relocate, but what about the mobility of our workforce and trying to do that across Canada? And I think if we look at the barriers to that and try to remove them in some aspect, that can really help us. And that goes to the essence of your question.
So you'll get back to us on some of those recommendations. I read somewhere just recently that I think 20% of our GDP is directly or indirectly responsible from the extraction industry, and of course you would represent a large part of that. So it's good to see that you're moving forward. I think that I understand that we do it really well. We must do it really well, and we have the infrastructure in place so that other countries that have the same resources that we have, however, might not be able to transport it like we can. So, are there any other areas that concern you? Are there any other areas that you see as critical to the nation's economic future in terms of the extraction industry and getting it to other ports that you see as something, or something that the government has done that is critical, will help you along those lines?
That's a very large question. So
Got about 20 seconds.
I'm going to try to do it really quickly. The key thing I would say is concentrate on this regulatory reform. The idea of it being more effective, more efficient, isn't because it was broken. We actually have one of the best systems in the world today. But to really move forward as what I would call to develop energy sufficiently to compete in the world, the more effective and efficient we can become in how we make our decisions and engage people is extremely important to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Van Kisten. Monsieur Côté, c'est à vous. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have the floor, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to begin with Mr. Saint-Pierre because I have a very good memory of my last meeting with Ms. Carole Presso. Recently, we talked about substantial matters, including the unbelievable complexity of Canada's tax system. So we have a point in common there. Let me give you a simple example. I've been filling out my income tax return for many, many years, and I do so for people I know well, and I do it for my mother. And one year she decided to buy some shares, and she could not benefit from a tax credit because of her age, so she kept on driving her car as a result. In any case, I was the critic for small business and tourism for that portfolio, and I learned a lot about the problems facing small business people with regard to research tax credits, and sometimes it was so hard or even impossible to take advantage of those tax credits, and some people told me it could even be a trap. So this is really unfortunate because it seems that our tax system is an obstacle to entrepreneurs and larger businesses. Can you give us some examples which show the extent to which some of these tax decisions can be an impediment to small business people and make a tough situation even harder? Well, in a previous life, before I worked in the private sector, I worked for Revenue Canada for 6 years, so I've seen both sides of the coin. But unfortunately, when it comes to research and development tax credits, they've become so complex, and now small businesses are being asked to produce very voluminous reports and information. And when I was an auditor, I could not prevent something. An auditor, I could not do my job. My job was to bring in money for the government, and I could not switch into becoming someone who would help companies, small businesses, keep money in their pockets. And in fact, so in the last 15 years, my job has been to help small businesses. Perhaps the answer to your question is to transfer these research and development tax credits to another agency in government, another agency which does not have the mandate to bring in money for the government. Now, of course, we're going to help small companies fill out the requisite forms, and small companies will have to go see an expert. They charge money to fill out these forms. Thank you very much for having replied to my questions. Now, Ms. Pullman, thank you. It's a pleasure to see you again, and we have spent some time together in the past, and I don't know if I've said so in the past, but I'll take this opportunity to congratulate you and to thank you for having returned funding to the EI, for having mentioned the return of funding to the EI fund, which represents money taken away from Canadian workers who have contributed to the fund. So, having said that, I have a question for Mr. Péloquin with regard to the tourism industry, which has many seasonal jobs. So, there are many small companies which operate in a cyclical business based on seasons, and some of these businesses use the EI system, and they get qualified workers when they need them, and then they have to resort to the EI fund. And now in Quebec City, for instance, in winter, all heavy machinery operators who not only do road construction in the summer, but in the summer they will plow the roads. These people are very good at what they do, and they're hard to replace. So in your work, have you assessed the impact of reforms to the EI system?
Collecting information about the changes that occurred in the EI system to better understand the impacts. I should state right up front that we support the intent of those changes, that we want to find ways for making sure we can get people to work and back to work off the EI system, because it's meant to really help people through a transition from job to job. Having said that, we do know that there are seasonal industries out there that are very concerned about these changes. And we are currently sort of talking to them about what the basis of those concerns, and understand that a little bit better. But what's interesting is when you talk to those seasonal industries, they often say that they agree that changes need to be made to the EI system, and that they want to understand how they can also be part of those changes. And so at this point, I don't have an answer in terms of what the best solution is.
Thank you, Ms. Pullman. Thanks very much. Merci, Monsieur Côté. Mr. Adler, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I'm so glad that all of you are here today, because I'm hoping that we can get into a few issues and at the same time give my friends opposite a little reality check. Ms. Pullman, how many members does CFIB have?
109,000.
109,000. Can you tell me, of those 109,000, have any of those at any time come to you and said, we are in favor of a carbon tax?
We actually have asked a mandate question, as we call it, of our members on the carbon tax probably about 5-6 years ago, and they were not in favor of a carbon tax. Okay, so there's no groundswell of support in the business community. This being Small Business Week, I think that you being here is quite propitious. So let me just get a little deeper into this. What would a carbon tax do if it was imposed right now, as my friends in the NDP are advocating for, to the small business community? We know from we do a monthly business barometer which asks about the biggest challenges businesses face when it comes to cost to their business, and fuel is energy costs are among the highest in terms of concerns among small business owners, as the cost of fuel is already fairly high for them. So I think they would obviously not be in favor of any kind of tax that would add to the costs of energy.
And that would add to the price of all commodities that consumers would have to pay for, correct?
That's probably what would happen, yes.
Okay. Ms. Daw, do corporations pay tax?
Yes, I can say that a lot of corporations do pay tax.
Do they pay tax as people pay tax, or are they passed on as a cost of doing business to consumers?
In order for a corporation to be profitable, that cost has to be passed on to consumers.
Okay. So when we have a federal corporate tax rate of 15%, and corporate tax revenues in this country have gone up since we've lowered it to 15%, investment has increased in this country. We are now rated by the OECD, the World Economic Forum, Forbes magazine, as the best place to be doing business in the G8 countries. Does not a lower corporate tax rate have a lot to do with that?
Yes, absolutely. Lower corporate tax rates promotes investment. It supports job creation growth. It supports a stronger economy. And I think we've seen that in the last 10 years, while except for the recent period, while the rates have come down. I think that's absolutely the case.
So increasing the corporate tax rate, as my friends in the NDP are advocating for, again, would not be a good thing, would destroy jobs and discourage investment, correct?
Increasing the corporate tax rate, especially in the current economic climate, would be disastrous. It would be disastrous.
Thank you. Mr. McKay, again, our friends in the NDP have called the oil sands and any jobs and investment related to it as a disease. Do you concur with that?
I think the energy sector, as it stands in Canada, you can see the value to the Canadian economy, and I think it's one of the biggest reasons we've been able to build the infrastructure that exists in Canada today and what will help us to the future.
So it's clearly not a disease, correct?
I don't see any disease in the oil sands. As far as energy production in general in Canada, one of the things that I have the strongest faith in, again, goes back to an earlier comment I made. I think the regulatory system that's been set up in this country is one of the best in the world. And how we do that, and especially through the National Energy Board, has been an example for other jurisdictions on how we should make timely decisions.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Chair?
25 seconds.
Okay. Question to Ms. Pullman. Trade agreements, good or bad? Job creators or not?
Our members support free trade agreements. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Monsieur Giguère, vous avez 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate our witnesses being here. I have a question for the representative of small business. Lastly, the price of gas has increased significantly. 42 billion liters were used in Canada, an increase of $15 billion a year is what companies and consumers in Canada paid. Can you tell us what the impact of this $15 billion was? It's not imaginary, it's real, it's current, and which was authorized by this government. What impact did this have, that is, the cost of energy, on your businesses?
Already in our monthly business barometer, we do ask about which costs to business are the most concerning to them, and fuel prices and fuel costs have been the top of that list for the last several months.
Thank you very much for your response, which clearly indicates that this $15 billion bill is something you could have done without. Now, I have a question on pension plans. I've noted that you support a defined contribution plan, but under Canada's pension plan, which pays out defined benefits, it is very sustainable. In fact, it is the most sustainable of all pension plans. The RCMP pension plan, every member of this plan says that it is sustainable. That is, the public servant pension plan as well is sustainable. So how can you explain that defined benefit plans, which are the biggest ones in the country, are sustainable, and that the plans which are going bankrupt, the ones which leave employees with no pension income, are defined contribution plans?
Disagree that the federal public sector pension plans are sustainable, given that there is an unfunded pension liability in the federal public sector pension plan of between $140 billion and $220 billion, depending on who you speak to, who's doing the analysis. So and from our perspective, it's actually not sustainable, and we're not sure where that $140 billion.
You've just mentioned a huge figure. Are there any actuarial studies to show that? Because the parliamentary budget officer, the chief actuary for pension plans, and other accounting firms, they disagree with what you've just said.
I believe the chief actuary of the Canadian pension plan has said that there is a $140 billion unfunded liability in the public sector pension plan. And I believe the C.D. Howe Institute has also done some research to show that unfunded liability is in the order of $220 billion.
I'm sorry, but you're talking about the $140 billion to which there are no contributions. But if you take $140 billion, why has the government taken a surplus of $25 billion?
I don't think I can answer, but we do know that there is an unfunded liability, and I'm happy to provide you with the information that we have from the chief actuary that states there is an unfunded liability that in the federal public sector pension plan that we are worried about is going to eventually have to get paid as people start retiring in the public sector. And we want to make sure that what's happening in other countries around the world, like Greece or in various states in the United States, doesn't happen in Canada. And we're not asking anything to be taken away. We just want to make sure that folks in the future have a good retirement, but so do other Canadians who also pay for part of that pension plan.
I would like to take this opportunity to say that for all Canadians, the Canadian pension plan, which he says is not funded, is included in the debt, and then interests are paid out of the government's general revenues. Now I have a question for Ms. Daw. Basically, regarding the clustering of companies, if you cluster them, do you also cluster their corporate social responsibility or any liabilities they might have, or would that still remain separate even if you bring them together under the same fiscal system?
You have 5 seconds.
I think the question is in regards to tax consolidation and bringing corporations together for tax consolidation purposes. If corporations can be looked at as one individual unit and one corporation is paying its tax bill and contributing in that fashion towards the public, and another corporation is not doing as well, and they come together, the health of those corporations will improve going forward in the future, and there will be a corporation around to promote corporate sustainability in the future. If there's no corporation, it can't work towards corporate sustainability.
Thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur Giguère. Ms. Smith, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for coming today. It's very nice to have such a very knowledgeable group of people together out of the financial sector. Certainly in this country, we've been very fortunate because worldwide there's been an economic downturn. You mentioned Greece and other countries that are suffering. The Canadians are suffering. In this country, we have 770,000 new jobs. We have a AAA credit rating, and our banking system is very, very sound. So having said that, there are a lot of things that our government is doing right. You're here today to also give us some extended ideas because we like to collaborate. We like to talk about, what will make things better. Now, I'll start with Mr. Unruh. Mr. Unruh, as you know, we put $100 million into the Food Safety Initiative. $50 million of that is specifically on the system itself, making it better. And I know that the cattle industry has taken a hit with this incident that happened in this plant. And so, Mr. Unruh, do you think that the measures that have been put in by our government now have been helpful to all plants? And if so, how would you suggest maybe something like this happened? We've also hired 57 new inspectors, as you know, 157 new inspectors. Yeah.
I'll speak to the first part. I think it's important to highlight that the investment in research and systems and technology has been integral to reducing food safety incidences. If we look between the years 2001 and 2009, which is our most current data, we know that E. coli incidences reported by people in Canada has reduced to less than half of what it was previously. We still have work to do, and we don't want to see what happened. But on the other hand, we are seeing that risk reduction, and we continue. But we also need to focus on the fact that food safety research has to transcend all areas. It's not just one thing. And so, moving forward, obviously we see that investment in continued research because what we find is new things arise on an ongoing basis. I'll let Martin speak to the second part in terms of how to prevent.
I have a hard time with pointing directly to what we could do to directly prevent a situation like this. But having said that, I think the important part is that inspectors are vigilant, that producers are vigilant when they produce cattle to be harvested at plants such as this, which they are. And it's very important to note, I think, that in the future we're going to have to look at what did happen at this plant and reevaluate how we do things to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And that's our goal. That's our strategy, and I believe that's what is going to happen. But it can't be done tomorrow. It takes a bit of time to do this, and research is an important part of that, as Andrea has mentioned.
As you know, Mr. Unruh, we have put forth, we have addressed the recommendations put forward in the Weatherall report, and have, I said 157, I think there were 700 food inspectors we actually hired that were new on the jobs. And would you say that this was helpful to the all-over food safety in the country at this point?
Well, when you have well-trained inspectors, it's obviously helpful to food safety, and that's a pretty broad statement, but I think that is a very accurate statement as such.
Now I'll go to Ms. Bowman. As you know, we're talking about small business, and small business is certainly very, very important to our country. And of course, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business is an integral part of what happens with small businesses. So I said in the beginning we have 770,000 net new jobs, and we have the soundest banking system in the world 5 years in a row, actually. So there's some really good things that are happening here. And when you look at small business, there's been things that have been put forward that have been very, very important to the small business people themselves. And first of all, would you say that the hiring credit for the small business has been useful to grow small business and help them out? Could you comment on that a bit?
Ms. Pullman, excuse me, you're just about out of time. You've got about 10 seconds.
Yes, the EI hiring credit has been extremely important and is why we're advocating for it to be extended for another year and as long as EI rates go up, because payroll taxes tend to have the biggest impact on the growth of a small business.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Smith. And Mr. Hoback, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, witnesses, for being here this afternoon. I'm going to just pick up a little bit on what Joy was saying with you, Mr. Munro. In your presentation, I understand you didn't get a chance to finish it all, but I was just going through it. You talk a little bit about demographic change, and of course I come from Saskatchewan, and one of the big problems we're having right now is finding good labor, and the shortage of skilled labor, and that. What is the labor doing to the cattle sector, and what do you see for suggestions that maybe we could do to help you in that situation?
In Western Canada, labor is in short supply, and it's broad and across many different sectors, agriculture, and you know, we've heard it just a minute ago here, and for us, I think it's important to be able to obtain some of the temporary labor in a consistent basis, but also to be able to maybe move some of those people into a permanent position and into citizenship for Canada. And in our position, where personally speaking, in our position where we have a cow-calf outfit and a feedlot, we have a couple of temporary people, and if there's some way to keep those guys in Canada, we would do that, either through some type of sponsorship or some type of a way to help them to stay with their families and contribute in the way of paying tax to our country.
Is it fair to say that labor is I'm trying to look for the proper word, is a limiting factor in the growth of operations in the cattle sector?
Well, it absolutely is, especially in the feeding industry. It's a labor-intensive industry, and all of Western Canada is short of labor in that industry.
One thing this government's done in this last few years is the $20 million legacy fund over 4 years, so it's roughly $5 million a year you have for market development. And I know I was with you guys down in South America about a year ago with the Prime Minister talking about the trade agreements we have there. How have you found the utilization of those funds, and how's that working for you?
Do you want to? Those funds are really important to us. Obviously, market access is first to get into markets, but then you need to have a presence in those markets. And Canada is a huge exporter in terms of our industry, with 45% of the production being exported. But on the export, relative to other beef industries, we're actually a relatively small player. Relative to the U.S., some of those other parties. So, you know, we have to be able to obviously key in on the opportunities that are there for us, but also be able to compete with relatively large competitors in those markets and provide front to do that. And therefore, market development is part of that, because it's not just about supplying products, it's about creating relationships with people. What we find is typically long-term commitments are a lot more profitable for the industry than just selling beef by loads to different markets. So those funds are really critical.
Actually, I only have 5 minutes, and there's quite a few things I want to ask you. I know Minister Ritz, the last 2 years, I think every weekend or any break week, he's been abroad with you guys and with different industry players opening up markets. And if you look at the price of beef, now I understand we have a little hiccup, and that's just the market reacting to what's going on today. But the macro sense of the market is actually very positive for the cattle producers. Do you not agree? And would you not agree it's because of the export markets are opening up for the projects like tongues and that stuff that we want to eat in Canada? Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Basically, you know, we can sell all of the middle meats we want into North America, but we look at the entire carcass value because that's what gets prices back to fed cattle producers and feeder cattle producers. And it's those other products getting to those other markets that demand them that's integral and very, very important to us for long-term sustainability.
So again, TPP and CETA is going to be very important, and again, different markets for different products.
Yes.
You've got a $6 million budget for the beef science cluster right now. What are you doing with that $6 million in that science cluster?
We're investing in basically several areas of research, beef quality and food safety, and enhancing that aligned with the Canadian Beef Advantage, which is part of our marketing. We're also doing policy relay work to inform things like animal transport and animal care, antimicrobial resistance, and several other areas to provide science-based research to the policies being developed to ensure that we're in alignment with regulations, but also not impeded by them, given our trade nature.
Basically there for you to basically manage the way you see fit to adjust to whatever market conditions or whatever situation, for lack of a better word.
The current program was fairly prescriptive in the fact that once we developed the plan, it kind of had to stay. We are proposing under the next science cluster, which that application is being positioned and will be presented to the government at the end of this year, so we can hopefully have an April 1st, 2013 start date to have continuity. We are proposing some flexibility because, you know, things arise in the research world like anything else, and having some flexibility is very important. But a lot of the focus is long-term research like feed grains and forages where, you know, we see an increased expense and competition for those things.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoback. I'm sorry, Mr. Hoback, I'm sorry you're out of time. Mr. Jean, you're up next. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, for that. I hope Mr. Hoback's intrusion doesn't take out of my time. I'm just...
Most certainly not.
Ms. Dye, you're with Finning, is that right? Finning International? And where's your office located?
We've got many offices spread across British Columbia and Alberta. I'm located out of Vancouver, but we do have significant operations in Edmonton area as well.
I hope you mean Fort McMurray as well, don't you?
Absolutely, Fort Mac as well, yes,
okay.
Of course.
That is the place I represent. In fact, I think Finning, isn't that the largest repair shop in the world for Caterpillar? I think it is.
Definitely the largest Caterpillar dealer in the world. In terms of the size of the facility, I don't know. I don't have that information.
That's all right, but you did $1.8 billion in the second quarter in revenues. Finning did, international. You have people all over the world, and if you look online, 75 out of 85 jobs that you're looking for right now to fill are in Alberta.
That's correct. The ability to get people up into the Fort Mac region and get them working for us is tough. It's an issue.
Especially when you're only paying $225,000 a year for people to work in heavy equipment operation. Is that fair to say?
You know, of course...
Those are the wages you're paying.
In some roles, yes, that's definitely the wages. But there are lots of other issues as well besides wages, such as people leaving their family. People come in from Newfoundland, they fly on planes, they live in camps for
47 years, I can tell you. I know exactly what's going on there.
So there's other...
My question is, most of my questions are going to be to you in relation to CEPA, Mr. McCaig. I'm wondering about the pipeline industry. If in 2008 the pipeline industry was shut down in Canada, what would have happened to our economy? In your mind?
I don't have the exact figures, but I would do it in a picture form to you. If the pipelines were to shut down today, how do you heat your homes, turn on your lights, move your vehicles? And that would be the key answer I'd give.
And in fact, you know, as you mentioned, it costs $5 billion to transport all of the oil, I think, and gas in Canada, but you're actually adding about $122 billion to the economy. In essence, you're moving $127 billion worth of product.
That's correct.
Okay. So my next question is are the pipelines today in Canada constrained as far as the volume of material they can move?
Absolutely.
And especially for oil. Is that not fair?
Absolutely, especially on the oil side. The challenge with it is the market's changing as well, and where we're moving it and those types of things. We live in a worldwide marketplace, not only just North American. So that's why you're seeing a lot of the debate and discussion around how do you reach those other markets and why diversification is so important.
And In fact, right now we're discounting our oil by up to 30%, 40% sometimes to the Americans. We are doing that. We're discounting. It depends, of course, on the market because of the constraining pipeline capacity. Is that fair to say?
It depends what you compare it to, but your figures wouldn't be that far out.
Exactly. So, in fact, if we had more pipeline capacity, Canadians would have a better quality of life because they'd have more tax dollars being spent on the things they like to spend money on. Is that fair to say?
I would answer it in a slightly different way, that the energy resource sector of Canada has been one of the main pillars of how we are maintaining our infrastructure and our society. So,
in fact, you agree with me on that. Now, the other issue is, of course, we have to pay off our deficit, and our policy is to grow our economy and also to save money. But to grow our economy, it's estimated that the oil sands is going to be producing somewhere around 4 to 4.5 million barrels a day, which is over twice the production that it's currently undertaking. Is that fair? Now, where's this oil going to go without pipeline capacity?
It doesn't go anywhere, sir.
Exactly. So it's very critical that we have this regulatory changes and that we move forward on pipeline capacity for this country to move forward, to pay off our deficit, to continue growing the economy, and to continue to have a great quality of life.
It's very critical to make timely decisions to understand what the impacts are.
Would you say that the environmental integrity of pipelines and pipeline regulatory system in Canada is the best in the world?
As I stated earlier, I think it's one of the best, if not the best in the world. But the other thing I'd like to throw out with our regulatory system, it doesn't mean it can't get better. And that's what this is all about. That's what regulatory reform is about.
I've only got a couple of minutes, though.
You've got 8 seconds.
Okay. Well, my last question will be this. Are the pipelines being built today safer than they've ever been built before, with double wall through water systems, with monitoring systems that actually detect breaks before they can possibly happen, with the different thickness of materials, et cetera, compared to 30 years ago when most of the pipelines that are leaking today were built?
Very briefly, Mr. McKay.
Let me say in general that all pipelines have the benefit of better technology today, more highly skilled individuals. So as a matter of public safety, we move 99.96% of that product every day safely to where it needs to go. And that'll continue. And I think we can improve it with a more effective system.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Jean. And Ms. Glover, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for coming. We have a tremendous job to do here. We have had approximately 800 submissions from different organizations, and we're trying to bring out the best information we can to make some decisions on budget 2013. Having said that, I've seen some submissions that are refuting things that have been said here today. So I just want to go over a couple of things. I'll start with Ms. Pullman. And I do want to thank Mr. Cote for bringing up the fact that the EI operating account was in fact rated not by this government, but by a previous government, and that measures have been taken by this government to address that shortfall, and so I appreciate your support as well as you answered those questions from Mr. Cote. But talking about EI, there has been some submissions suggesting that we address EI in other ways. In fact, there's been suggestions that we double CPP. There's been suggestions, and you've probably heard them all, suggestions that we go to a 45-day work year where we allow people to access EI after 360 hours as opposed to what currently exists, which is on an average about 600 hours that you have to work before you can access it. Some places it's lower, of course, and suggestion that trade is not good for our country. So on those three items, going to a 45-day work year, going to a doubling of CPP, eliminating trade, what would that do for your businesses?
Well, certainly on the EI and the CPP side of things, making EI more generous would obviously result in increasing EI premiums, which is, as I've pointed out in my presentation, something that our members would really not be able to absorb very easily. It would affect their ability to hire. Same with CPP premiums. As people know, the employers pay 50% of the CPP premiums. They pay 60% of the EI premiums, and any increases in those will have a direct impact on small businesses' decisions to hire, and there's no doubt that they will think twice about having to hire or add people to their workforce if those go up. As for trade agreements, small businesses, about 25% of our members do trade externally, and 50% are actually importing as well. So it's an important element, and I think it's important that the barriers, and the reason that not more of them do that is because there's so many barriers to trade. And any way we can negotiate eliminating some of those barriers through free trade agreements, I think will only encourage more businesses, smaller businesses, to also look at other countries.
The organization has been very supportive of this government's attempts to reduce the tax burden on small businesses and other corporate businesses, knowing that you are the job creators. We strive to make it easier to create jobs. I do note that, Ms. Daw, you also made a comment about corporate taxes. Again, I'm just referring to submissions we've had. We've had a number of them that have said, let's go back to 19.5% in corporate taxes. What would that do to your businesses? Would you be able to create more jobs? Would you be able to sustain the jobs you have? Would that increase be passed on to consumers? Tell Canadians what that would do to our businesses and our economy and jobs if that were to happen.
Around the world, I think most of the members here probably know that corporate tax rates are coming down. And in decisions about where to invest capital, tax rates are a huge element in that decision. So if you can choose between the UK, where the rate is 23%, and Canada, where the rate is 45%, chances are your decision is going to be swayed towards the UK. So capital and jobs are going to go elsewhere if the rate goes up. So it's important that the rates stay where they are or they go down in the future.
Increases in taxes are borne by, as you said before,
consumer, yeah.
By the consumer,
by
exactly.
The consumer.
And when we talked about electricity, Mr. Giguère brought it up, and I don't know where he got those numbers because I know nothing of what he mentioned with regards to this government. This government's a conservative government. We lower taxes. We ensure that Canadians have more money in their pockets to pay for the things that they need, like electricity and like food. What would a carbon tax do to electricity if businesses had to pay this $21.5 billion in the NDP platform to recoup a carbon tax? Would that not be borne by consumers, as you've said, Ms. Daw, in the form of a download? And that means everything like their groceries and electricity, everything will go up. Please comment on that.
That's correct. So any increase in taxation, especially a tax of that type, will just get passed right along to consumers in the end. There's no results that it can go if the company is going to stay in business, quite frankly.
Last comment that I would have, because I know I'm short of time. Monsieur Saint-Pierre, vous avez mentionné auparavant.
Mr. Saint-Pierre, you mentioned something earlier, a few things with regard to changes to trade with other countries.
To encourage governments like ours and countries to exchange information so that we can, in fact, recoup some of those lost taxes. And so our government's been very busy with those. Do you know how many we've signed and how many are in negotiation right now?
No, I know that there were some that were just signed, but I would not know the number. It's easy to find. We can answer.
Thanks very much, Ms. Glover.
Madam Chair, may I? Ms. Glover asked a question. No, I'm sorry.
A couple of minutes left in this session, and I'm going to take the liberty of, as chair, of asking a couple of questions before we wrap up. I'm sorry we don't have more time with the witnesses. I just want to, first of all, express my condolences, I guess, to Mr. Unruh and the whole Cattlemen's Association for the challenges that your members are facing right now. I'm sure it's very difficult for your members, and I regret we haven't had more time to actually hear from you about the kinds of challenges, economic and I guess personal, that many of your members are facing, but we do appreciate you being here. But I'd just like to ask a general question to all the panelists, and we only have a couple of minutes, so maybe anyone who wants to answer can take this. The current issue of The Economist has as its largest section an investigation into the whole issue of inequality, both within countries and globally, and it talks about the economic and the social and personal impacts of inequality. And I'm wondering if you can leave our committee with any thoughts or recommendations that you believe the federal government, measures the federal government should take that would help make sure that we're addressing income inequality and that we're not having the subsequent problems that were outlined in The Economist. And if you haven't read it, it's very interesting reading. But any final thoughts on that? Anyone want, Mr. St. Pierre?
Well, I'll be brief. I think if you remove trade barriers, you allow people to work, and when the people work, there's less inequalities. So the tradespeople, they should be able to work. The second thing, keep it simple for them so they can focus on working. So the more complex their tax return at the end of the year is, the more complex trade barriers are, the more complex anything is. So just let them work. I think that's what we should do, and allow people to freely travel across Canada.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes.
From our perspective, I mean, the biggest thing you can do to improve industries in terms of equality, all of those things, is access to markets and trade and opportunities for that industry to prosper, whether it's domestically or internationally. Likewise, access to workers, but also, you know, regulatory reduction and harmonization. We want to ensure the safety of our product, but we also want to ensure we can compete globally with others. So it's always trying to find that balance between risk reduction and mitigation. And we view that, and then access to workers when necessary to support the sustainability.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I guess a last comment, and then we're about out of time. Mr. McCaig.
Just quickly, because I agree with the other panelists, and part of all that discussion is the clarity around the rules. Make sure it's as clear as possible so people can understand. That helps them make informed decision making. And if we can make our rules, our regulations with a sense of purpose, a sense of objective, we can measure if we're on the right path. The clarity around how you achieve them, you'll help overcome a lot of these barriers that we've been talking about.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the panelists. We appreciate you being here today. We'll take just a few minutes so that we can change up the panel for our next session. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. If folks still have discussions, they can maybe just step outside, and I want to wish a warm welcome to all of our witnesses for the second half of this meeting. Bienvenue aux témoins. D'abord.
Welcome to our witnesses. First of all, from the Agence métropolitaine de transport, Mr. Daniel Bergeron. Good day. From the Association québécoise de l'industrie touristique, Claude Péloquin. Welcome.
Chitagne, bienvenue. Forestry Products Association of Canada, David Lindsay. Hello. The Social Economy Working Group, Patrick Duguay. Hello. And St. Boniface Hospital, Dr. Michel Tétrault. Welcome to all of you. You each have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and I regret I'll need to interrupt you if you go over. Monsieur Bergeron, on va commencer avec vous.
Start with you.
Thank you. Mon nom est...
Je veux juste vous avertir de parler.
I would simply ask that you speak slowly enough so that the interpretation can follow. Thank you. With pleasure.
Point of order, I need to clarify, if you wouldn't mind. Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair.
Based on the submissions that came to us, there were some 800 submissions. There are 2 organizations that are represented here today. I know we were only allowed to pick 120 to 150 who submitted, but 2 never submitted, and I'm wondering how we deal with that, simply because we, out of the 800 who submitted, we picked the ones that were, supposed to come here and present, but we've just now received something from 2 organizations that didn't submit as required by the deadline of August 3rd. So I'm asking your help in trying to determine how we deal with this, because we haven't had the time to read their submissions, so we're ill-prepared to move forward. So I'm just asking for your advice on that, and I apologize to the witnesses, but I would like your interpretation of what was decided.
Just on that point of order, we know that this time we changed the whole system. We used to be able to get briefs. We had questions that were put online. I think there were a lot of confusion from the witnesses in terms of how they appear and in terms of the briefs. I think for this case, since it's the first time that we're actually putting in place the new system where they're answering questions rather than having briefs, I think we should accept the fact that we the fact that we have witnesses. I think would be respectful to hear them, since we have people who came all the way and came to Ottawa. It used to be where we go there and we were able to prepare. But the fact that there was a new system with maybe some glitches, we can talk about it after in terms of post-mortem and see what we can do to benefit. But now that we have witnesses coming here, having, I think the least we can do is to listen to what they have to say, and then we can ask questions to them.
Ms. Glover.
And thank you, Monsieur Mai, for the suggestion. And I'm happy to hear from the witnesses. They've come all this way, and we're happy to hear from them. However, we do have to address this because we do have several meetings. And so I'm looking for your interpretation, because it was very clear. There are 800+ submissions. Folks submitted because they knew they had an opportunity to present, and to have a few of these organizations present when we discounted more than 600 other organizations who followed the rules is why I'm asking for an interpretation for future meetings. And if you'd like to take that elsewhere and discuss it or pass it on to discuss with the chair, I'm happy to move on to listening. But it is something we need to address so that this doesn't reoccur.
Thank you, Ms. Glover, for raising that. I think that in the essence of respect for the witnesses, we should hear from them today, and it's something that perhaps we can take to a subcommittee and look at for future witnesses, so that we're addressing your concern. I'm not sure exactly what that means in terms of witnesses who may have already been invited. So let's take it to a subcommittee where perhaps we can have a fuller discussion. Thanks. Okay. Finalement, je pense que.
Okay. Well, finally, I think if you're ready, Mr. Bergeron, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Daniel Bergeron. I'm a vice president at the Agence Métropolitaine de Transport in Montreal, and we are quite honored by this invitation to appear before this committee. The Agence Métropolitaine de Transport is responsible for public transit in the region of Montreal. Our region is 83 municipalities, 3.6 million people, and we're looking at 15 transportation agencies that are responsible for all public transit. That is equivalent to $500 million in travel in the region. So it's a significant amount. It's also 10,000 direct jobs provided by these various public transit agencies in the region. Aside from helping transit the 50% of workers that, of course, use public transit in the region. Operating costs are $1.5 billion in the region. It stood at $1 billion in 1996 and will stand at $2 billion in 2017. Funding for current services is covered by the users, essentially 40 to 50% of users, by municipalities and by the government of Quebec with respect to investment, as well as the federal government through the various funds that exist today. Along with public transit in the region of Montreal, and I think you'll experience the same thing in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, the major urban centers, we see great congestion in urban centers and barriers to certain types of trade transport. In the area of Montreal, we have the STM and other partners, and we've created an investment plan over a 10-year period to reduce traffic congestion and favor economic activity through the transport of merchandises. And this investment plan provides for $17 billion in investment over the next 10 years. This is a huge amount. Provincial and municipal governments are involved mainly, but we believe the government has a role to play on two fronts. First of all, by in fact creating a dedicated fund for public transit, an investment fund in the order of $1 billion over the next 7 to 10 years. And second, by maintaining eligibility for public transit programs for the current programs that are already in existence. And third, by offering some guidelines and an action plan to support these two investment funds that I referred to earlier. This would be over the next 10 years. These would be our recommendations. So first of all, to create a new dedicated fund for infrastructure, public transit for the cities, so over a 7 to 10 year period, $1 billion per year, Canada-wide. The second would be to maintain the current funds and eligibility for public transit to access those funds. And third, a national policy, a national action plan for investments in public transit. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Péloquin, Association québécoise de l'industrie touristique. Good day. Thank you, first of all, for inviting our association to speak to you this afternoon. I will be dealing with the importance of the Canadian Tourism Commission to capitalize on the international market. I would point out that I'm Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Association québécoise de l'industrie touristique. I am also President, CEO of the Station de ski du Québec, or ski stations in Quebec, as well as Chairman of the Canadian Ski Board. So our association, Association québécoise de l'industrie touristique, represents about 10,000 companies throughout Quebec, sectoral and regional agencies. Our purpose and mission is to represent and advocate for these various members and ensure that the tourism industry expands as it should in Quebec and in Canada.
Contribute to $7.8 billion in revenue to Canada economy. It operates year-round across the country and employs Canadians of all education background and age. Contrary to other economic sectors such as manufacturing, tourism creates employment that cannot be outsourced. Jobs in the tourism sector will not be transferred anywhere else in the world. The Canadian Tourism Commission is Canada's national tourism marketer. It sustains a vibrant and profitable Canadian tourism industry. As worldwide tourism receipts keep growing, Canada's share in this growing export sector continues to erode. International arrivals have increased by 4.6% globally, while international arrivals to Canada are down by 0.8%. Canada's international travel account deficit, balance of payment, was $16.25 billion in 2011, a 14% increase over 2010. This is not good news for us. Taking into account Canada's tourism deficit and the enormous economic potential of the industry, it is absolutely incoherent for the CTC, our country marketing agent, to have its already limited budget being amputated by $14 million, or 20%, in the 2012 and 2013 financial exercise. While Canada loses ground, countries have invested in considerable marketing vehicles in order to face the challenge from new and emerging competitors. Some different countries invest a lot of money in the tourism budget to market. For example, Ireland, they have a budget of $211 million to budget their destination. In the last 15 years, Ireland had an increase of 14% of growth in arrivals from key markets. Australia had a budget, an annual budget of $147 million to market themselves around the world, and they had an increase of 30%. At the same time, Canada, with only a budget of $72 million in 2011, in the same period, has a decrease of 10% in their arrival from key markets. And this is not a good news. Almost all major tourism destinations are cashing in on this incredible boom in the industry, welcoming increasing number of visitors every year. Only 5 of the top 50 most popular destinations in the world are losing ground. Not only is Canada on the 5 country who are losing ground, but we have fallen 18%. Our annual losses in terms of international arrival amount to 3.6 million tourists since 2000. Our recommendation, as other countries are investing considerable amount into promoting their appeal for tourists, the Canadian Tourism Commission has seen its financial resource reduced by 41.5% over the past 10 years, going from $99 million to $58 million in 2013-14. Canada must have a strong national marketer that will strategically position the country abroad and capitalize on our Canadian national identity, our culture, our nature, and our winter.
Thank you, Mr. Péloquin. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Monsieur Chetaigne, vous avez 5 minutes.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
For Congress, we want to thank you for the opportunity to present our views to the 2013 federal budget. As you know, the CLC brings together workers from virtually all sectors of the Canadian economy, in all occupations, in all parts of Canada. Leading economists, including bank economists, say that Canada's economic recovery is stalling due to slow business investment, high household debt, and weak global growth. Business investments are not where they should be. The across-the-board corporate tax cut didn't deliver the promised investments in real assets, such as new factories and in workers' training. And thus, these cuts failed to boost economic growth and productivity and didn't help create more and better jobs in Canada. Instead, those corporate tax cuts delivered high compensations to CEOs, cost Canadians billions in lower than expected government revenues, led to higher federal debt and deficit, and led to cuts in public services. However, those across-the-board corporate tax cuts have helped private, non-financial corporations in Canada to hoard over $500 billion in cash reserves, money that is not working to create better jobs and more jobs in Canada. To compensate the lack of investment from corporations, we need a major public investment program to create good jobs now in Canada, promote our environmental goals, stimulate new private sector investment, and boost productivity. The CLC calls for federal government to launch, in partnership with provinces and cities, a major multi-year public investment program. A program should include increase in support for such things such as basic municipal infrastructure, mass transit and passenger rail, affordable housing, quality affordable childcare, energy conservation through building retrofit, and renewable energy projects. The CLC support targeted measures to support and create good jobs in manufacturing and to maximize job creations in industry linked to the resource sector. This will require government strategies on trade, sectoral development, and domestic procurement strategies. Encouraging value-added production and investment in key sectors, along with green job and green skills initiatives, will enhance innovations and labor productivity. Having sectoral development policies seeking to promote more investment, productions, employment, and export in especially important sectors of the economy is key to attain a more desirable mix of sector in our economy. Also, we cannot afford trade investment that gives priority to investors' right over the right of workers and their aspirations for decent work and decent lives. We need new international trade and investment framework that has, at its core, the promotion of high labor standards and collective bargaining, high job quality, and a sustainable global economic development. Also, Canada's economic success and the future prosperity of every Canadian will depend on the capacity and capabilities of a skilled and educated workforce. While there is much talk on future skills shortages, Statistics Canada report that there are more than 5 unemployed workers for every job vacancy in Canada. Training and lifelong learning are critical, and literacy and numeracy skills in Canada lag many other countries. Training Canadians instead of importing vulnerable migrant labor should be at a top priority. The CLC calls for the development of a national tripartite skill development strategy in response to the growing skills gap, the aging workforce, and the specific need of groups such as Aboriginal, recent immigrants, and youth. Finally, some of our key federal programs do not match today's reality. Only 37% of unemployed Canadians receive EI benefits. The CLC calls on the government to implement a uniform national entrance requirement of 360 hours, increase the benefit level from 55 to 60%, and base benefits and durations calculations on a 30-hour work week. The CLC continue to call for a doubling of future CPP benefits, phased in on a fully pre-funded basis, and we welcome the support given to CPP expansion by Ontario and many other provinces. We call on the federal government and all provincial governments to pursue this option as an urgent priority.
Thanks very much. You'll have a chance during questions to add more. Mr. Lindsay, you have 5 minutes.
Bonjour tout le monde et merci beaucoup.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much.
Today, staff have already received our pre-budget submission, and they have a copy of the more fulsome remarks, so I'll try and keep my comments brief in the interest of time. The forest industry in Canada remains an important part of our economy from coast to coast. There's some 200 rural communities across the country that depend on the forest industry as their primary employer. The forest industry in these communities has faced significant challenges and headwinds in the last number of years, but our Forest Product Association recognized that we couldn't remain business as usual, and we launched on a path of transformation and renewal. And I'm pleased to report to the committee today that we've made considerable progress on that journey. And so I'd like to talk today about some of that momentum and how we can work with our partners to continue. Earlier this year, the Forest Products Association launched what we refer to as Vision 2020, and it focuses on ambitious goals for our products, our performance, and our people. We want to, by 2020, have $20 billion of new economic activity. We want to have a 35% increase in our environmental footprint and success in improving our environmental footprint, and an additional 60,000 new recruits, including women, Aboriginals, and new Canadians in those communities in which we work. Vision 2020 is built on some of our recent successes already. We've improved our productivity, we've diversified our markets, we are making technological breakthroughs and producing innovative products with wood fiber, and we've established world-class environmental standards on behalf of the forestry sector. The government and all of our partners have been instrumental in supporting these changes. Embassies and trade officials have been very helpful in our trade and marketing efforts. NRCan created the successful Pulp and Paper Green Transformation Program. There's been critical support from industry, government, and the academic community for FP Innovations, which, for those of you who are not familiar, is one of the world's largest forest research centers located here in Canada. It's unlocking some world firsts for the commercialization of something called nanocrystalline cellulose. It's an amazing product that comes from wood that can be used for everything from bulletproof vests to lipsticks, and I'll leave you to fill in the humor there. $100 million investment in the Forest Industry Transformation Fund, or IFIT, has been very helpful, but it's been oversubscribed by some fivefold. So that just indicates the amount of enthusiasm for commercializing these new products that exists in our industry. So while we're very proud of the progress we've made, FPAC and our member companies certainly understand the current fiscal challenges faced by the government and faced by our economy, and the need for controlling our deficit. We would strongly recommend that where the government does continue to spend, that spending should be aimed at supporting industry renewal and focusing on enhancing our ability to compete globally and create jobs and prosperity for the long run. The forest sector is one of those opportunities I would put to you. We're green and we're a renewable resource. We encourage the government to continue to support the bioeconomy for forestry and agriculture as well. Last year, my predecessor at this committee mentioned the potential for the Next Generation Biofuels Fund, administered currently at Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and we'd like to see the government continue to look at opportunities to invest in the bioeconomy and to enhance the IFIT program. So by working together with government and the academic community and our environmental partners, we've already accomplished a lot, and we need to continue to work with all of our partners to continue to help the forest sector and forest-dependent communities that we serve to meet the goals of Vision 2020. So let me make a couple of specific suggestions for the committee today. We need to continue to support the research and innovation to make sure some of those groundbreaking products I alluded to are not only developed but can be commercialized and taken to the global marketplace. We'd like to see the government improve its strategic procurement programs to increase the purchase of next-generation forest products ranging from building materials to biofuels to medical supplies. We have a challenge with rail services, and if we're going to get our products to market, we can't leave it at our loading docks. We need some help with rail service reform. And we have, as my colleagues already alluded, we have some challenges with skilled labor shortages, so we need to focus on labor for the next generation coming along in the forest sector. So, Madam Chairman, by working together with the government, we can help to create new opportunities for new jobs and new growth in rural Ontario, Canada and small-town Canada. And by working with all of our partners to implement Vision 2020, we'll ensure Canada has a world-class green and renewable forest product sector well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. And Mr. Duguay, you have 5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much for having us here. To begin, my name is Patrick Duguay. I'm the president of the regional Outaouais-Laurentide Co-op, and my office is just on the other side of the river, so I really didn't have to come from very far to be here. And in fact, I took a co-op taxi to get here today. So, 2012 is the International Year of Cooperatives as decreed by the United Nations. Last week, 2,600 cooperators from across the world met in Quebec City for the first international summit on the invitation of Monique Leroux, the president of the Desjardins co-op organization. I represent a smaller organization. I work in the social economy, and this was funded in Quebec in 1996. At the time, on the invitation of the government of Quebec, which had chosen to promote and to use collective entrepreneurship and to have this movement help communities. So Le Chantier, this organization, promotes the social economy, and it brings together networks of big organizations, networks of organizations which support economic development, and networks of universities. So after all these years, we have our own financial tools to help new projects. We have strategies to promote the labor force within the social economy, and we also have research and transfer tools. In Quebec, there are about 7,000 co-ops, 3,000, or rather collective organizations, of which about 3,000 are co-ops. So the non-profit aspect represents $5 billion in the economy, and $3 billion more if you include the Desjardins co-ops. These organizations represent 8% of Quebec's GDP, and this is just the beginning. In Quebec, the co-op movement goes back many years. We have public policies to support co-ops, and this is in fact the case in most Canadian provinces. So this co-op movement, of course, is present mostly in the charitable sector, and again, this is the case across the country. More and more, people seem to be discovering collective entrepreneurship in order to meet new needs, or needs which in fact had not been properly addressed until now. So these social economy organizations are invested in all sectors of the economy, be it transportation, the forestry sector. These companies have chosen to operate by different rules in these various sectors. So today I would like to briefly explain to you some of the approaches and hopes that we have for the Canadian government. We certainly hope the Canadian government recognizes the International Year of Cooperatives. And in fact, the last thing that was done, the government did, was to abolish the last remaining federal support co-op program in the country. In fact, the government also decided to cut back in its cooperative secretariat, which was attached to Agriculture Canada, and they had originally 94 employees. Well, now they're down to 6 only. And the most important thing for us is to guarantee that all of these social economy organizations all have the same kind of access to support programs that small business has. So these social economy businesses, even though they don't, their mandate is not personal enrichment, are nevertheless organizations, and it would be important to promote their development. Mr. Flaherty, in his last budget, referred to the task force report on social finance, which in fact our organization signed on to. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Duguay. Mr. Tétrault, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I was going to start by saying thank you for the opportunity to talk about some daunting challenges, but when you said speak slowly and do it in 5 minutes, that just replaced the first challenge. But also I'd like to talk about some exciting opportunities. Healthcare is very rapidly creeping up onto a $200 billion industry in this country. And by all analysis, it's an unsustainable industry. And that is not only in Canada, it's throughout the developed world. And it is totally regardless of who is paying for it, whether it's private or public or mixed or mutuals, as in Europe. No one can afford to pay the price we are paying for health care now. So St. Boniface Hospital is wishing to propose to contribute to trying to help in this phenomenon. And there's really two pieces to this equation. One is obviously when there's not enough money, you can either grow the income or reduce the expenses, and we have some ideas on both of those. And the first, in terms of growing income, we think we should be investing more in supporting research in Canada. St. Boniface Hospital was the first standalone basic research center in a hospital in the country. And we've had some successes, and some companies have grown quite nicely, thank you. So I think of Intelligent Hospital Systems, with it, last time I looked, was 80 employees in Manitoba that just didn't exist a few years ago. But we still aren't capable of supporting our researchers with our advice and our expertise as much as they need. And everyone wants to support the home run hitter that everyone knows is a home run hitter. But people find it very difficult to find the wherewithal to support the guys who are going to hit, the guys and girls who are going to hit the singles and doubles for us until they produce that home run. The other thing that St. Boniface is proposing is to allow our infrastructures to be used off hours and weekends by fledgling small and medium enterprises. It might not surprise you to learn that Canada produces 4.1% of the scientific papers in the world, but only 1.7% of the patents that come to fruition. So we believe that more products will create more companies will create more jobs, and more jobs will create more wealth. So that's the plus side of the equation. Je vais maintenant passer en français, mais l'autre côté, c'est de réduire...
I'll continue in French. We must reduce our healthcare spending, which is unsustainable, and we believe that this is doable, and I think we can do this by improving the quality of services. And at our hospital in St. Boniface last year, we decided there would be one priority, and that would be quality. And the way to implement that was to use an approach which was based on transformation. Now, a lot of people think that transformation means simply improving efficiency, but one of the biggest experts in the world in the area said that this means a radical change in the culture of how to treat patients. So quickly, 4 main directions, strategic directions for us. 1, patient satisfaction. 2, engage staff. 3, decrease injury or damage to patients, and 4, manage resources better. And so we've been able to measure results, and really our patients have never been as satisfied. We've hit satisfaction peaks in the past year. Up to 97% of our patients said that the care they received was very good or excellent, and not just satisfactory. Our staff is completely engaged, very involved, and those rates have increased significantly as well. The mortality rate in the hospital has gone down by 30% in the last 3 years, and in fact, our objective had been to bring that rate down by 10%. So the financial performance in the last 2 years has also been better, and in fact, in each of the last 2 years, we've hit our objectives 1% year over year. So 1% of our $300 million budget. We were able to bring down costs, and this year our objective is to bring them down by 9%.
I would call on you to reflect on this. If we were to take the $200 billion spent on healthcare in Canada and were to apply 1% over 5 years, year-over-year improvement, that's a cumulative total of $30 billion in an financial improvement. If the St. Boniface Hospital were to manage to help people reach, within the Canadian society, 10% of that goal, if the contribution of that 10% of $30 billion were to be 1% of that, that would be 30 million. So we suggest the establishment of a center of expertise for people to be trained in these fields so that we can help other establishments throughout Canada progress in this direction, to have more satisfied patients, employees that are more engaged, and better results. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tétrault. Now we'll be moving to questions for the witnesses. We will start with Mr. Mai. Mr. Mai, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. We know that some of you have been are actually coming from much further than just the other side of the river. It's always wonderful to have highly qualified people like yourselves appearing before committee. I only have 5 minutes, so I'll be quick. One of my questions, Mr. Stang, you were saying that the reduction in rates, we're looking at a $500 million. Even the Governor of the Bank of Canada, even the Minister of Finance, admitted that this dead money was not reinvested by private companies into the economy. So what we would suggest is that there be infrastructure investments, as you mentioned, on public transit, and also the IMT representative mentioned that, and I'll give him the floor as well on that question. Why is it, and given the fact that we know that there are $123 billion that were put forward by the CFM saying that there's an infrastructure deficit, that's the amount they raised. So why hasn't it worked? Why did this amount not work? Even the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Bank of Canada says that the reduction in the tax rate has not worked in this respect.
La principale raison pourquoi ça n'a pas fonctionné.
The main reason why it hasn't worked is because it's based on an understanding of a false understanding of the economic model. It worked, but in the interest of a certain group. Tax cuts were corporate tax cuts for corporations that pay taxes. So clearly those corporations that needed help in a strategic sector or non-strategic sector did not get any help through that cutback. Those cuts rather. One of the reasons why it hasn't worked, according to us, is that it wasn't designed to work. It was designed to be to the benefit of the managers of these corporations. We see huge bonuses in those corporations to the main shareholders, also the CEOs. We don't see an investment, though. We don't see what's the rationale behind these tax cuts. So the result is that we're looking at $500 billion in not being used to reinvest into the Canadian economy, to improve productivity, to train Canadian workers, and that's wasted money. What do we do with that? Well, it's quite simple. That money was accumulated because the tax rates were reduced. That money should be made to work for the benefit of all Canadians, so we could recover not retroactively but rather proactively by adjusting the tax rate for corporations and, of course, focusing this money on strategic investment. Thank you. We were referring to a national infrastructure plan and a public transit plan that was put forward by my colleague, Olivia Chow, but the members across the way did not agree with that. Why is it so important to invest in this type of a program? What can this do for the economy? What are the benefits of this? Canada-wide, public transit represents in the orders of $10 billion of injections into the Canadian economy. So that's public transit Canada-wide. 35,000 direct jobs, 24,000 indirect jobs associated with public transit. So that's significant. For workers, there are many of them, and for families, it represents, if we're looking at people that use public transit as opposed to other modes of transport, that's $5 billion. Even within the greater Canadian economy, that's one thing, but you look at families as well, that's $5 billion being used for public transit. So if I get back to the issue of reduced greenhouse gases and the quality of the environment in our major cities, on a number of fronts, it's very beneficial to Canadian families.
Is really moving towards renewable. You are, advancing in terms of reducing greenhouse gas. Would putting a price on carbon, would that help your industry in terms of investing into way to reduce the greenhouse gas effect and having a benefit in terms of all the investment that you're already doing and the fact that you actually can compensate for other industries that are more polluters?
Seconds.
The official position of the Forest Products Association has not got one on carbon tax per se. Different provinces, as you may know, Alberta and others have some carbon tax. But what we've done in the pulp and paper side in particular is reduced our emissions by last count 67%, and then with the most recent program the government brought forward for pulp and paper transformation, an additional 12%. So we're pushing over an 80% reduction in our sector's emissions in the last 5 to 7 years. So we're making as much of a contribution to reducing our pressure on greenhouse gases as we can.
And as you know, we are also against the carbon tax for cap and trade.
Merci, Monsieur May.
Monsieur May.
Thank you. And, certainly the community I represent with the Green Transformation Fund, I noticed the mill managed to decrease particulate emission by 70%. Huge major changes. So I think, you flagged something that the industry, through some of the existing programs, have really managed to step up to the plate in terms of, what the opportunities that technology will provide in terms of a much greener industry. But Mr. Lindsay, I think I have to give you the chance to respond, because I know, having gone through the 2008, watching the mills close in the communities that I represent, can you talk to me in terms of how a competitive corporate tax rate encouraged their plans and how they responded in terms of when they were making decisions about their business, and do I open a mill, I reopen? I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into it, but what are the factors that played into decisions made by companies in terms of, their mills? If you could talk to some of those.
Question. There's been a lot of initiatives to try and help the forest sector by both provinces and by the federal government. The Pulp and Paper Green Transformation Program, or members of the committee have not seen it yet, the Canadian Forest Services did put out a report in September which itemizes a number of those benefits. We've taken changes to the pulp mills across the country to not only deal with particulate matter, but to deal with the issue of generating new revenues through putting energy back onto the grid, for example. The pulp and paper sector now is, and the forestry sector is now, as a result of this program, putting enough electricity onto the grid to light all of the houses in Calgary, for example. So that's another source of revenue through a government investment in a government program. The expansion into China has been a huge effort, and the folks at the Chinese embassy and the people who have been helping us with marketing our green forest sector around the world have been incredibly helpful. The tax regime and competitiveness regime is always part of any industry decision. But also a transportation system that can get our products to market. So I hope at some opportunity someone will ask me about the needs for a transportation service agreement with the shippers and the rail industry as well.
You know what, I'm happy to ask you about that because it seems like you're very keen to give us, because of course one of the things is we're focusing on this budget, we maintain the goal of trying to get back to balanced budget by 2015-16, and so ideas that sort of reduce burden around regulations or, really support a thriving economy without actually being significant expenditures are certainly mostly very welcome.
The forest industry is part of a larger shippers coalition, including grain industry, the chemical industry, the auto industry, and others, mining. And we're not looking for additional regulations and regulatory burden. We're looking for a dispute settlement mechanism. I can't speak for all of the other industry partners in our coalition, but in the forest sector, 80% of the mills that we represent are in communities at the end of railway lines or in remote regions of the country where there really isn't another alternative. So while people may have a debate on whether you believe in competition or don't believe in competition, or believe in free enterprise or don't believe in free enterprise, or you believe in regulation or you don't believe in regulation, when there's only one supplier, in my first-year university course, that was called a monopoly. And if the trucks are not able to get through the roads, rail is the only way to do it. And if we want to be shipping to China, the rail cars need to be there so we can get to port and get over to our international markets. So it's a matter of timing, enough cars arriving, are they in a clean enough condition that we can put our product onto them so they can go to our international customers. So we're asking for a mechanism in the Act that allows, where there is a disagreement between the shipper and the rail company, that there is a recognized pattern of dispute settlement and that there is an accepted service level agreement procedure. Because if you're the monopolist, you can say, if you're not ready to put your product on my rail cars, I'm going to penalize you. And if I say, your rail cars aren't ready for my product, I can't penalize you. So we need a balance in the agreement between the shippers and the rail companies.
Thank you very much, Ms. McLeod. And Ms. Sgro, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you all very much for coming today and providing us with some very interesting information. Mr. Duguay, the issue of co-ops. We have a big shortage of housing, affordable housing in Canada, no matter what province I think you're at. There's a real need for affordable housing for seniors, for low income, and for lots of families. What's the plan? I congratulate you on the whole organization on achieving a milestone. The concern is, where is it going in the future, and what do you see the next 10 years being when it comes to the co-op industry?
Well, over the coming years, we're expecting growth, both in the number of cooperatives, but also their effectiveness from a financial standpoint, as well as for the benefit of people. You were talking about housing, and it's a major concern in the major cities. That is to try to find housing that is well adapted to the needs, the changing needs of an aging population. This is a concern that exists both in the urban and the rural settings, but the conditions are quite different. The cooperative sector today ought not to be considered an island upon itself. There are constant interactions between cooperatives or all social economy enterprises and the private sector and the state. And I believe that the major change coming has to do with the hybridization or cooperation between these various models to be really focused on people's needs. So we see today that there is potential for private investments or fundraising for investments in collective projects like housing, all the while agreeing on a common goal.
Have you had any indication from the current government that they are interested in partnering with the private sector and so on in order to achieve some of that desired goal?
From the government. We can't say that we've seen too many signs, encouraging signs to that effect. What we have noted in the last year specifically has been the few paltry programs that existed disappearing. So the Initiative de Développement Coopératif that was not used much in Quebec, but this cooperative plan was used elsewhere in Canada. Quebec represents 50% of cooperatives, and we don't represent that much in population terms. So that program really supported the provinces that wanted to develop the social economy, and they were deprived of that instrument. Also, from a tax standpoint, there's been some setbacks. These historic demands to support provincial governments that wanted to implement a regime that would support, or a scheme that would support individuals within the cooperatives, that again was made more complex due to disadvantageous fiscal or tax policy.
Mr. Brigon, the issue of infrastructure is critically important in Canada. In all of our major cities, the amount of time that is lost from getting from point A to point B very much requires a further investment in the whole infrastructure fund, transit being a critical component of all of this. Now, your suggestion was that the infrastructure fund have $1 million a year put into it. Well, there's a huge shortfall already. So can you comment further on that?
Yeah, actually, for all through Canada, it costs us, with our large city in Toronto, in Calgary, in Vancouver, in Montreal, more than $3.7 billion per year in loss in our economy from congestion. Congestion is a major problem. To answer that question, we can enlarge our roads, but there's a limit to that. We can go to Los Angeles and a place like that to see why. Or we can invest in public transportation. Federal government, since the last 7 years, already invests about $1 billion per year in public transportation through actual programs. These programs are very good. They focus on municipal infrastructure, and from that, we already have $1 billion per year. What we recommend for the next 10 years is to maintain those programs that are already very interesting, but also to add one to a dedicated fund that will add $1 billion per year for the next 7 or 10 years for, again, public transportation. And it will support the economy through everywhere in Canada. This is very specific to public transportation. We have it through all our main city in Canada. And it creates, again, almost 80,000 jobs actually through Canada, and we want to sustain that and also sustain people going to work. An example, and 2 people out of 3 going to working in downtown Montreal are going by transit already. So it's very important for the other worker also.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Gros. Mr. Van Kesteren, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming. Mr. Lindsay, what do you think? Do you think we should be investing money in fast trains or freight trains?
Yes, the infrastructure challenges across the country are not to be minimized or trivialized, but no matter how many trains you have, if they don't show up at your loading dock, you can't get your product on them.
I would agree that the difference is that the rail companies invest because there's money to be made. Whereas the question, I beg to differ with Mr. Bergeron, that, and I live in Chatham, southwestern Ontario, and I watch the trains go by, and I see 4 trains and I see 4 people on them. So, you know, there's, and I don't minimize the fact that there are people maybe in other centers that are wanting trains, but in Mr. Lindsay's case, they're building these trains because there's industry there. Anyway, it's an interesting discussion. I think we should have it another time. One of the things that I learned, I think we all learned in industry a number of years ago, Mr. Lindsay, when we studied the forestry industry, and there were some severe challenges at the time, is that we've turned a corner, seems like. And would you agree that the free trade agreements had a large part of that? And as well, and I know we've seen a significant downturn in the American economy, but that at least has been resolved as well too. Has that helped your industry? Is that one of the areas that's possibly made a difference?
Not to go over sad news, but there were a series of severe hits on the forest sector, broadly defined, in the last number of years, beginning with the change in the way people read their newspapers or read their newspapers online. So the newsprint sector was hit. U.S. housing starts started to go down even before the Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis. And then when the financial crisis hit, the Canadian dollar, when we had a 68-cent Canadian dollar, our product was much easier to sell into the United States. So when all of those things started to hit, our individual companies realized they had to start looking for new markets, and it was with the support of officials in many of our embassies and across the globe, not just free trade agreements, though free trade is something that we certainly would be supportive of. The infrastructure with our trade officials and trade missions and making sure that we're marketing our forest products. The unique selling advantage we have is in our forest sector, we have the largest amount of third-party certified forests in the world. None of our members would support illegal logging. I could go down a list of the unique selling features of Canadian products, and we'd like to work with all of our partners to help promote that around the world.
All in all, a success story, and I think that we can agree. One of the things that was noticed, I posed a question when I was in industry, and I'm wondering if there's been a change there. The Swedes seem to recognize that everybody has forests, not everybody has equipment. Are they still the leading country for manufacturing of forest products, or are we starting to make some inroads here?
The products in the mills, the Scandinavian countries have a very good supply chain, and many of our mills would purchase from them. But where we are making aggressive investments and where FP Innovation is working very cooperatively with the academic community, the research community, and the industry, is to come up with new products. Nanocrystalline technology is something I mentioned in my presentation. That's a product coming out of the forest that can be used for that high sheen gloss you see on flat screen TVs. So imagine when you're sitting at home watching your TV to know that it's got a forest product in it.
And I think it's worth noting that this is something that the forest industry did on its own. This is something that they saw markets, they saw the challenge, and they reached out. Prior to that, would you agree that there were too many companies that were unhealthy? And one of the reasons that they were unhealthy is because there was propping up. And once that was lost, it seems a little crass, but those that were the best managed to surge forward. And what we have today is a very strong and healthy forest industry with some good companies that are able to compete in the world.
Lancaster, Mr. Lindsay, we're out of time. Just a very brief response, please.
I appreciate that we're out of time.
Okay, thank you very much. Monsieur Côté, vous avez 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Péloquin, I'll give you the opportunity to respond to a question based on facts. I received a letter from the president of the Canadian Hotels Association, with whom I had spoken many times. So he'd sent a letter to his members saying that Canada's tourism industry is in crisis, plain and simple. And after having described the cost to the Canadian Tourism Commission over the last few years, he said due to a lack of funding, the CTC has been forced to exit many markets, including Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, Switzerland, Japan, and the U.S.
Globally. Et Monsieur Pollard montre.
He also compared Canada's support to its own tourism industry with that of other countries, and really we have no reason to be proud. Hawaii spends $73 million to promote tourism, and California, which is suffering economically, spends $51 million. Can you comment on this? Well, thank you very much for your introduction. Indeed, as with the hotel sector, the situation has been denounced throughout Canada. That is, the situation with regard to the decreased budget of the Canada Tourism Commission. And this has led the Commission to make difficult choices. These choices focused on the markets surrounding Canada, that is, the American market. We used to get a lot of American tourists here in Canada. And over the last 4 or 5 years, and you mentioned other countries where we stopped promoting our country or promoted it less. To promote Canada as a tourism destination requires a lot of work, and this work has to be carried out over several years. So when you pull out of a country, when you stop marketing Canada there, it shows, and we are receiving less tourists, fewer tourists from abroad. Yet Canada is a country which is perceived as being a beautiful country to visit, a safe country to visit, and people do want to come here. But it seems that we cannot capitalize on the image that we have. So for us, it would be very important to increase the budget to the Canadian Tourism Commission. Yes, in fact, I previously was the critic for small business and tourism, and I learned that Canada had the best image throughout the world. And in fact, we are the goose that lays the golden tourism eggs, and all MPs in the House of Commons should be concerned with this. So do you think that your members might call upon MPs to do more to promote Canada? Yes, this idea is making the rounds. In fact, it seems that for the next 2 years, the budget will be trimmed back even more. So it would go down to $58 million. So we would have gone from, in 2001, from $99 million to an even greater increase over the next 2 years. So the entire sector is mobilizing, and we really want the government to increase the budget and to bring it up to $120 or $130 million each year. Thank you. Madam Chair, do I still have time? Yes. I have a question for Mr. Dugault. In my writing of Beauport Limoilou, there is a paper company, and it seems that there is a group of former executives who have tried to come up with a plan to create a co-op for this paper plant. I wanted to help them. I contacted the former CEO, and I was surprised to learn that this co-op project was not being supported, that it was really hard for them to put it together. But if these officials had wanted to come together as a business, it would have been much easier to do so, and they would have gotten support. So, of course, money is what makes the world go around, and this is a crying example of that. Would you have other examples to demonstrate that co-ops are not receiving financial support? Well, I think that the greatest bias against social entrepreneurship is, in fact, simply a lack of knowledge. Many financial institutions just don't know enough about the sector, and you find this lack of knowledge in private financial institutions and in vast sectors of our society. So, unfortunately, the situation you describe would have received support in other countries such as France. France is amending its Cooperatives Act in order to make it easier for organizations to transfer if there are no buyers, no outside buyers for a business, so that these companies can in fact be sold, if you will, to their employees. So other countries are more advanced than we are.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here this afternoon. I appreciate you staying late here with us as we do the pre-budget work. I'd like to talk to all of you, but unfortunately I only have 5 minutes, and she's very close on the watch. So I think I'll go with you, Mr. Lindsay, because I come from Prince Albert. The forestry sector is huge in Prince Albert, and it's going to be huge coming again. You know, it was 2005. We had an NDP government. We had a pulp mill shut down. Because the pulp mill shut down, the sawmill in Big River shut down, the mill in Carrot River shut down, and you know, if you look at Saskatchewan, it'll be a really interesting case study, I'm sure some economists will do. When you look at what happens when you have bad policy, and then you put a government in place that brings in good policy, and you can see what happens. And, you know, in 2005, we're looking for jobs. We're lucky Ryan's area in Fort McMurray was hiring people because the guys that worked in the mill actually went to Fort McMurray, stayed in Prince Albert, and worked back and forth. But now we go forward to 2012. It's a really interesting scenario. We've got the mill reopening. We've got, in fact, it's already started up. They're running the cogen. They're producing green power, which is something we all like to hear. But we have a huge problem. And the huge problem now is I need 300 workers to run the plant. And I need 400 construction workers to get it back going. I've got an investor who has money, who wants to do it, who's bought it in Prince Albert Pulp and Paper Excellence. They've worked with the First Nations to start working on getting the people out in the field to cut the trees and do all that work. But the labor shortage is a huge issue in Saskatchewan, and of course, it shows what can happen when you have good policies like you have with the Sask Party and the good, strong federal government, and what can happen when you have bad policies with the previous NDP government we had in 2005. And the impact it's had on the region has been phenomenal. In fact, the Carrot River Mill is starting up. It looks like the Big River Mill will be starting up here pretty quick. We've seen reinvest in the forestry sector. And Mr. Lindsay, you really touched a nerve when you talked about the exciting new products that you're making with forestry fiber. So maybe I'll just ask you about the severity of skilled labor shortage and how it's affecting your sector.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holbach. Excellent question, and I think it's a challenge for all of Canada and all industries with the aging demographics of baby boomers, but particularly in the forestry sector, because we did face those down periods due to layoffs. Our workforce is somewhat older than the average, and they will be coming up for retirement. So we have estimated, rough estimates, some 40,000 workers that need to be replaced due to retirements, and then an additional 20,000 plus for our new products and our new markets. So that's where we come up with the number of 60,000 over the next decade. And that won't come from one source. It has to come from all sources. There are many people who live in these communities close to the mills that haven't been thought themselves traditionally as forestry workers. Women, new Canadians, our Aboriginal population, First Nations. We are creating programs with all of our employers and with the Forest Products Association to promote forestry as a quality of life, a good green job to have. We will do our part to promote forestry in particular. We need the help of all of our partners, provincial governments, the federal government, and others, to make sure we've got that skilled workforce coming in, whether it's through immigration policy, through making sure there's enriched training and support programs for First Nations, transferability of skills across jurisdictions. It's not just skilled labor, but unskilled labor. So it's a volume and a quality challenge. And it's not going to be solved with one tool. We're going to need a whole basket of tools, and we're working with our partners to develop those right now. The First Nations communities, we just gave an award to a wonderful young woman who is of Métis background, a woman, and she's developing new and wonderful technologies for the forestry sector. So a skilled worker from the Métis community. You celebrate the successes and try to bring more people into the industry.
Well, that's what's exciting in Prince Albert, because we still have these guys working Fort McMurray, flying back and forth. We need 300 new people, so that's 300 new families moving into Prince Albert region. And that's not talking about the truckers and the loggers and all the other small communities. And our vacancy rate, they're telling me now, is less than 1% or 2% as far as places to find to live. So, all of a sudden there's opportunities for carpenters, and try to find a plumber and try to find an electrician. So these are great problems, because in 2005, when we had an NDP government, the issues that are coming to me is who's going to pay the bills in these towns for infrastructure, because there's nobody living there. And it's now the issue is, how do we get more money for infrastructure when we don't have people to build the infrastructure? So it's actually an interesting problem. Now, you talked about rail services, and I know in the ag sector we've got huge issues on rail service. I know what it's like to be a farmer, to have about 6 or 7 semis on the road on a Sunday night, showing up at an elevator, and all of a sudden I get a phone call Monday morning saying that train didn't show up, so what do I do with these 6 semis that don't belong to me, and I have to get them unloaded somewhere, and the elevator's full. Where are you at in dealing with the railways as far as a level of service agreement? Because I understand they said that they've made negotiations in some of the ag sectors with some of the companies on doing that. Have they been able to do that with you guys?
Out of time, so very, very brief response, please.
The time I didn't use on the last one, I might use on this one.
Yeah.
The rail companies have reached out to some of our members, but the Forest Products Association, through my colleague Catherine Cobden, tried on a number of occasions to come up with an agreement that would be acceptable by all parties, and that was rejected. So our concern is we've gone up to the altar a number of times, and then it falls away. So if we have a service level agreement understood in the legislation, then that will create that creative business tension for the two parties to come together to work it out. We're not asking government to impose service level agreements. We're asking for a safety valve that should business-to-business discussions not be successful, there is a mechanism to resolve that in the rail and shipper relationship. So we're not asking for imposing rules. We're asking for a framework if we cannot come to an agreement. If the rail industry is telling us that those are easy to do, then they shouldn't mind having this legislative enhancement.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Monsieur Giguère, vous avez 5 minutes.
Alors, je remercie les témoins de cette présentation.
I would like to thank the witnesses for being here. We know that our colleagues across the way spend more time inventing things about us than looking into the impact of their own economic policies. When you are responsible for increasing fuel to the tune of $15 billion a year, it's no laughing matter, because every day Canadians who put gas in their car pay for that. This government can also be criticized for focusing on one economic sector, that is natural resources, when, in fact, in my case, in the riding of Marc-Aurèle Fortin, I've recently lost 200 jobs. 200 workers need an income. They were willing to work. They were ready to work. In the manufacturing sector, there was a trucking company that has closed its doors, and so these workers come on top of the 500,000 Canadian workers who have lost their jobs. There are many, many more today than in past years. So I'm just wondering whether you can tell us today about the economic policy, the consequences of an economic policy based on one sector of the economy only. Well, you describe these consequences, these repercussions. They affect people in their daily lives. They affect jobs, incomes. So what we see today are several things. First, the economic development policy based on a certain sector of the government. In fact, they don't have an economic policy. They believe the market will decide. If workers lose their jobs, it's their fault. They're hoping for a silver bullet, a miracle. Government representatives say that the private sector should invest, but the private sector does not invest, and the government says it does not understand why. So there's an attitude of laissez-faire, and this leads to terrible repercussions, and I think we're missing a golden opportunity. We have the opportunity to use our ability as a government to borrow and invest in order to create jobs, increase productivity, and help workers. We're missing an opportunity to be more strategic in how we use our resources. Our natural resources should not only be extracted, but also transformed in Canada to create jobs here and expertise here. We're missing the opportunity to create more opportunities to train Canadians. So instead of importing workers, we can use the 1.4 million Canadian workers who are unemployed, including many youth. So we're missing many good opportunities. I have a final question for Mr. Duguay regarding cooperatives. We've noticed that there is a problem with regard to the Canadian Business Development Bank. There's no new blood within small and medium-sized enterprises. These family businesses don't have any people who want to take over. And so what can be done to create jobs and to help that sector bring in new blood? Can the co-op sector help in that regard? Well, the point is not only to create jobs, but to maintain the jobs that already exist. And it's easier to sustain a job which has been created than to create brand new jobs. And in Quebec, this represents 22,000 organizations which are going to change hands over the next 10 years. So SMEs are huge huge creators of jobs, and there's a lot at stake. One of Quebec's traditional demands of the federal government is to have a joint fiscal program for co-ops. And this kind of program would encourage investment on the part of workers themselves into the companies which they work for. This would inject new funding to meet challenges and to sustain these organizations. So I believe this is part of the levers which we should which we should use. Thank you. You have 30 seconds left.
Final question for Dr. Tétrault. Thank you for your presentation. A number of people have spoken to the committee and said that one of the main reasons for the increase in healthcare costs was poverty, because poverty leads to medical costs. Can you explain this? On the one hand, absolutely. On the other hand, the current healthcare system that we have is not really meeting the needs of people. And those that have the greatest needs are generally those that are most disadvantaged. And we have to adjust our healthcare system in relation to those needs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Giguère.
5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, and just very quickly, I was kind of puzzled when I listened to some things that were being said on the committee, and I'm going to direct my comments to Mr. Chatang, first of all. Having listened to what you said initially in your presentation, you stated that the government had a false undertaking of the economy, and here we all know, it's public knowledge, that 770,000 net new jobs have been created. We have a AAA credit rating, and we're known as 5 years in a row the most solid banking system in the world. So we're doing something right. And yet when I listened to you a little later, you advocated a 30-hour workday. You said that childcare, we need to do a childcare program, which is basically provincial jurisdiction, not federal jurisdiction. And then you said we should open up free trade. Well, we've opened up more free trade agreements than any government in the history of Canada. And we're working now with more. So all of these things have been met. And as I listen to you, I'm trying to understand a little bit. You talked about, taxing people and things like that, but how do you square a $21 billion carbon tax being laid on the people, which, how do you think that would help these people you're talking about, the workers? How would that affect them? Because that's what members opposite are advocating. I'm just curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. There's some confusions, I guess, in terms of using. We're not recommending a 30-hour workday. First, I want to say that. And the answer, although about the false understanding of the economy, I think it's a false understanding that giving across-the-board corporate tax cut would magically create jobs. Our message here is around the corporate tax cuts that we could be a lot more targeted. The second thing, and I said it earlier, I think there are missed opportunities of doing better, and this is the main point of our presentations. We have, and we haven't called it, there have been the use of the dead money of $500 billion. If I recall, $500 billion is about the size, it's a bit less, but about the size of our national debt. This is how much money it is. There's a lack of opportunity of that money, putting that money to work. And what we're saying is that we could put that money to work to make a better Canada. Now, and as we said, invest in multi-year major public infrastructure that would increase our infrastructure, but also increase our productivity. And there's also other things that should be tapped. For instance, we do not have a good sectoral development strategy. What we have is basically a magic miracle hand.
I did mean, as you know, a 30-hour work week, not a work day. You know that. Having said that, I'm going to give my time. Mr. Jean wants to ask a question. I have more questions for you, but I'm going to give it over to Mr. Jean.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious if you're familiar, Mr. Chatang, in relation to the $123 billion infrastructure deficit that we were in 2006 when we came into government. I mean, that was identified by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Are you familiar with that, sir?
I am familiar with the existence of underinvestment in municipal
No, I'm asking you for the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They specifically said there was a $123 billion deficit in 2006. Are you familiar with? They did say that, anyways.
Yeah.
And are you familiar that the federal government brought in the Economic Action Plan in 2008, 2006, 2008, and stimulus funding in the range of $45 billion? Sorry, the mic didn't catch you, and I think the gentleman needs to.
I would like to say I am familiar with this, although I would like to say that I would like to hear your entire rationale, because you could be saying, for instance, that a dictionary is big, and I am big, so I am a dictionary. So I would like to hear your entire rationale before answering questions. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate that for your interruption. Now, you also know that, of course, during that economic action plan, that the federal government put certain requirements in place, including municipal investment along with the economic action plan that the federal government put forward, with provinces matching those funds as well. So in essence, the $45 billion, including the stimulus and the economic action plan funding, is going to be somewhere around $135 billion. At least that was the idea. Now, do you know, sir, that in relation to this economic action plan, you know, we've had tremendous amounts of investments in highways across the country. VIA has almost received $1 billion. We've had a huge amount of green infrastructure invested, et cetera. Were you aware, in relation to all of this money, that the New Democratic Party, every single member voted against that stimulus funding and all that economic action plan? Were you aware that they actually stood in the House of Commons and said no to all of that economic action plan that you're suggesting we put forward more of? Did you know that?
Thank you, Mr. Jean. You're out of time, so a very brief answer, Mr. Chatin.
I believe I'm out of time.
I'm offering you a brief answer if you'd like to answer. Okay. I'm with the committee's indulgence. We started just a few minutes late. I'd like to offer Ms. Glover her full time if there's agreement to do that. We did start a few minutes late because there was a procedural question. If the witnesses are fine for one more round of witness questions, Ms. Glover, you have 5 minutes.
Sorry. I do want to thank all the witnesses for being here. And
when we talk about tourism, I fully agree. It has incredible effects on our economy. The government recognizes that, and the minister is working on that. But I'd like to talk to Dr. Tétrault from the Saint-Boniface Hospital.
Incredible, Dr. Tétrault. You have addressed a number of things that we have been repeating over and over again. Things like demographics, and in the words of your submission, there's a remarkable increase in life expectancy for 65 plus and particularly for 85 plus, and fostering research environment at what you are calling a Centre for Healthcare Innovation in Canada to assist an elderly population to remain healthy and active in the workplace is of great interest to me and to Canada. I find it very interesting that your submission focuses on what we've been saying, and that is to create some jobs, to take care of those vulnerable people in our society, and to make sure that we use every dollar efficiently. And the 70% of the time that is unfortunately wasted by our nurses, as indicated in your proposal, looking for or searching for tools or implements that they need, equipment that they need, restricts them from patient care. And so I encourage everyone to read the deck that you've provided, and the job creation elements in your proposal are fantastic. To partner business in innovation and in commercialization with the healthcare industry, there is money to be made, but there are jobs to be created. So I appreciate everything that you've put forward in your submission. I do want to give you an opportunity to address something that was distributed. You also distributed letters of support. I want to thank you for that, because as an MP, in your riding, in fact, I get calls about the things you've been doing to educate other hospitals and other industries. Mark, would you mind if you I just can't see our wonderful witness. I get calls about what you've been doing. You've been asked across the country and in other parts of the world to come and teach this lean program that you are advocating to reduce inefficiencies, etc. You've been approached by people who are interested in this idea of a Centre for Excellence. You've submitted a couple of letters of support. I want you to just tell us what these are and give us just a snapshot of what you've done for these two agencies that leads us to believe that what you're saying is in fact going to help our economy and our healthcare industry to progress.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the kind words. John Toussaint is one of the world leaders in the lean movement. He's the CEO of the Theta Care Network for Healthcare Value, and as such has seen 60 organizations. And we collaborate already quite closely with him in terms of how we can exchange between hospitals our experiences, I'd say our expertise and our knowledge. And we are developing programs as we speak as to how to more effectively and efficiently do that. Interestingly, we did have the first Canadian Lean, we called it the summer school because it was in June, in Winnipeg in June. And we had, this one happened to be francophone, so we had every one of Quebec's teaching institutions, the CHU de Genève and the CHU de Montgodin in Belgique, come and see us. And some of the people that came were the people in charge of quality improvement at the Jewish General Hospital. And when they went home, Dr. Stern, who wrote one of the letters, called me and said, Jesus, these guys say you're so far ahead of us, I got to come and see you. So we do have a fair number of people who come and see us. In a few weeks, the University Health Network in Toronto is sending 16 people to come and see what we're about. And we think if we make that sort of more formal, more official, develop the curriculum a bit more, that we can have a positive influence.
Which I agree, and I know that you fly all over the place when you're also the very important president and CEO of a hospital, so I can see why you're here today. I do know that Novidac also submitted a letter of support, and I'm just going to read it. It says in their letter, indeed, Novidac's platform technology had its origin in Winnipeg, and the St. Boniface Hospital Research Centre was instrumental during various phases of the technology, innovation, and development, which gives support to this idea of a centre in your location. So I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about costs, because we haven't addressed that. I see it's a fairly minimal cost in the deck, and for any cost that is provided, you expect a return on business innovation, you expect a return on job creation. I want you to comment on that a little bit.
Very, very briefly, Mr. Tetra, we're out of time.
Two pieces. On the research part, the return doesn't come to the hospital. It comes to society, because the jobs are created outside of us by the people that we help along. On the healthcare side, our own return on investment is so far about 6 to 1. For every dollar the hospital has put in, we've gotten 6 back. So if we multiply that by the number of hospitals in the country, I'll let you do the math.
That's very good. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Glover. Merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you to all our witnesses. I am now adjourning the meeting. Thank you.